A maid clatters plates as she sets down a meal for Lady Irene, who sits quietly at the lavish dining table, holding her pregnant belly. Stroking her pregnant belly, Irene smiles softly and says, "Just one more month and this little one will be born. Then you'll finally meet your father and me." The blonde maid presents a tray of chocolate pastries, smiling warmly as she says, "Seeing you so happy brings me joy too, my lady. This is a special dessert made by the young master especially for you, since you have such a sweet tooth." Reaching out to pick up one of the chocolate treats, Irene thinks, "Judging by its appearance, it seems Cosmos made them himself." Giggling to herself, Irene fondly imagines her husband struggling in the kitchen with an apron and a mixing bowl, thinking, "I guess he's more accustomed to wielding a sword than a cooking tool." Gently touching her belly, Irene reminisces about her husband's warm embrace and how he used to rest his head against her stomach, whispering, "Your father and I are so excited to finally meet you. We already love you so much." Suddenly, the dining room door is slammed open and a panicked maid cries out, "Lady Irene, something terrible has happened." Irene drops her dessert in shock as a dark shadow falls over her, accompanied by the horrific news, "Your father has been accused of treason and sentenced to death." Gasps of disbelief escape Irene as she rises abruptly from her chair, knocking over her plate as she demands, "What did you say?" Clutching her belly in distress, Irene exclaims, "My father, who dedicated his life to the kingdom, is suddenly being accused of treason?" Her maid desperately tries to comfort her, pleading, "Please calm down, my lady. This could harm your health." Refusing to stay put, Irene pulls away from her maid and declares, "Let me go confirm this, my lady." "No, I'll go myself." As Irene runs out, another maid with a grim face intercepts her, announcing, "Lady Irene, we have urgent news about Duchess Russell." Overcome with panic, Irene grabs the maid and demands, "What happened to Mother? Please, tell me now," while her servants beg her to stay calm. With eyes cold and hidden under her bangs, the maid breaks the tragic news. It seems she was overwhelmed after hearing the news about her husband. Heartbroken, Irene envisions her mother lying lifelessly on her bed, having followed her father to the afterlife in grief. Irene collapses to her knees on the cold marble floor in sheer agony, crying out, "No, this can't be! How could this happen?" Unnoticed by Irene, her maids stand in the shadow with sinister, evil smirks on their faces as they mockingly call out, "My lady!" In the shock of the tragedy, Irene goes into sudden, painful labor, bleeding onto the floor as her loyal maid screams frantically, "Call a doctor immediately! Her ladyship looks unwell! Get her to the bed at once and inform the young master too!" In her fading consciousness, Irene sees a glowing, peaceful vision of her beloved parents smiling down at her, and she whispers, "Father." Reaching her hand up toward the full moon shining over the estate, she weeps, "Mother, why did you both leave me?" Back in her bedroom, a medical team and maids gather around her canopy bed as the doctor gravely notes, "Her condition is unstable." The doctor turns to the frantic maid and commands, "A natural birth will be difficult at this point, so we'll need to perform a C-section. Prepare for the delivery immediately." To which the maid tearfully replies, "Yes, ma'am." Biting on a cloth in excruciating pain, Irene weeps, "Cosmos, where are you? I just lost both my parents. I can't lose this baby too." Cosmos Parker stands in the shadows, dressed in his military uniform, displaying a cold and completely indifferent expression. Irene reaches out from her bed to beg her husband, but Cosmos brutally pushes her away, sending her crashing back as she screams in pain. "Cosmos, please, I don't care what happens to me, as long as this baby." Turning away with a look of pure disgust, Cosmos coldly orders his staff, "Tell everyone that Irene had fallen ill, and unfortunately suffered a miscarriage." Staring at him in utter disbelief, Irene cries from her bed, "Cosmos, the husband I loved, how could you? You used to be so kind. How could you give up on this baby?" Clutching at his pants leg, Irene begs him through her tears, "What are you saying, Cosmos? This baby is still alive. Please, save them. You're the only one who can, right?" Cosmos looks down at her with dead eyes and sneers, "Irene, at first I thought you were pure and innocent, but you turned out to be nothing more than a foolish woman." In shock, Irene cries out, "Wait, weren't you looking forward to the baby too? You even made me dessert, so why?" Before being cut off by a sudden interruption.
Cosmos stares at her coldly and delivers a crushing truth. "To be honest, I never wanted you to have that child."
With tears streaming down her face, Irene looks up at him in complete heartbreak and asks, "Then why did you marry me?" As Cosmos turns his back on her, a memory of their wedding day appears, and Irene thinks bitterly, "You were just an ornament to me. I was blinded by love all this time." Reaching out in desperation from her bed as he walks away, Irene begs, "Wait, don't go, Cosmos." Overcome with physical pain and heartbreak, Irene collapses heavily from her bed onto the cold wooden floor. Lying helplessly on the floor, Irene shivers and weeps. "Cosmos, why is this happening? It's so cold." As Cosmos walks away into the bright light, Irene feels herself falling into a dark, endless abyss, crying out, "Why is this happening to me?" Clinging to the floor, Irene begs for answers as a woman in elegant, expensive shoes steps into the room and mockingly asks, "Tell me why? You want to know why? It's because you're a descendant of the Russell family." As Irene looks up in shock, the mysterious woman sneers, "But you won't be alone in death." Cosmos continues to walk away without a single backward glance, his voice echoing coldly, "At least in the afterlife, you won't be lonely." Duke Vincent's daughter, Vivian Vincent, steps forward with a smug, malicious smile, prompting Irene to gasp in shock. "Vivian? Why are you here? And what did you just say?" Vivian stands triumphantly over Irene, explaining, "Your father collaborated with the Kingdom of Miorans to assassinate the Regent King, and your mother, unable to bear the truth, followed him. Let me tell you something interesting. All of this was part of our plan." Vivian leans down close to Irene, her eyes glowing with red malice as she laughs, "Including your marriage." Vivian mockingly embraces Cosmos as Irene watches in horror, with Vivian adding, "Our plan? Yes, are you just realizing that now? Cosmos loves me, not you. You were just used as a pawn to move your father's army." Irene's vision darkens with ink-like despair as she envisions her father's execution, hearing Vivian's final, cruel words, "Our objective is complete. You and the Russell family are no longer useful." Suddenly, Irene's loyal maid Catherine rushes into the room, horrified by the sight of her mistress on the floor, and yells, "My lady, what is going on here? How could you treat Lady Irene like this?" Catherine steps in front of Cosmos, confronting him with fiery rage. "Don't you feel the slightest bit of guilt?" Without a single word, Cosmos draws his sword and brutally slashes Catherine in a single merciless strike. Catherine's lifeless body falls right before Irene's eyes, leaving Irene to scream in absolute horror and grief. "Catherine!" Clutching her chest as tears of raw hatred and sorrow stream down her face, Irene weeps, "Cosmos, I truly loved and admired you, but you destroyed everything so easily." Irene looks down with deep remorse as she stands before Cosmos, clutching her pregnant belly, and says, "Even if it's too late now, if there's anything I regret in this life, it's marrying you." Resting her chin on Cosmos' shoulder, Vivian gives a sly, side-eyed look and mockingly whispers, "Hey." Pointing his sword forward, Cosmos coldly orders his men, "Arrest that woman," to which they eagerly reply, "Yes, sir." As guards holding shackles close in on her, Irene prepares to unleash her power, thinking to herself, "I won't let this happen." Unleashing a blinding, powerful light from her magic bracelet, Irene commands everyone to back away, shouting, "Step aside, it's a trap!" Shielding his eyes from the intense burst of magical light, Cosmos draws his sword and shouts, "Get back!" The magical strike hits Vivian directly in the chest, leaving Cosmos wide-eyed in absolute shock as blood splatters. Staring at the terrifying scene in disbelief, Cosmos screams out, "Irene!" Holding a poison needle with a dark, vengeful look on her face, Irene declares, "That was a special poison needle. There's no cure for it. Even if it costs me my life, for the sake of my parents and this unborn child, I'll take all of you down with me." Coughing up blood, Vivian clings to Cosmos and begs in agony, "Please, Cosmos." As Cosmos watches with a stunned and pale expression, Vivian clutches her throat and cries out, "It hurts so much." Preparing to drive the poison needle into her own neck, Irene smiles bitterly and declares, "Cosmos Parker, I curse you." Surrounded by dark lilies, Irene plunges the needle into her throat as her final words echo, "Forever." Standing amidst the unconscious guards as his sword falls to the floor, Cosmos can only watch in horror as Irene collapses backward, thinking, "So that you can never love anyone again." In a frantic blur, a desperate Cosmos reaches his hand out to try and catch her as she falls. Sinking into a deep, silent darkness, Irene feels her consciousness slipping away as she wonders, "Am I dead?" Floating down into a crimson void where dark, shadowy hands reach up for her, Irene thinks, "If I could redo everything, I would never." Resolving never to repeat her tragic fate, Irene's mind screams through the darkness, "Die such a pitiful death again." Curled up in a protective sphere of red light, Irene hears a soft voice calling out to her and wonders, "Is someone calling me?" Irene opens her eyes to see a tearful but overjoyed Catherine calling out her name, leaving her completely bewildered as she asks herself, "Catherine? How am I still alive?" Still in disbelief over her sudden revival, Irene wonders, "Wasn't I supposed to die back then?" Seeing her mistress awake, a relieved Catherine gently touches her forehead and says, "I'll call the doctor right away." Grabbing Catherine's arm in a sudden panic, Irene desperately asks, "Wait, what about Cosmos?" Catherine looks at her in confusion and explains, "What are you talking about? Lord Cosmos is at the Parker residence. The wedding is scheduled to take place in 6 months. Do you want to see him, my lady?" Looking around the luxurious bedroom in absolute shock, Irene realizes, So I'm not married to Cosmos yet. Then this must be the Russell residence? Trembling as she stares at her hands and flat stomach, Irene realizes she has traveled back to a time before she was ever pregnant. Catherine explains gently, "My lady, don't you remember? A few days ago, you fell into a lake while you were out with Miss Yahello and the others. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Looking down in sorrow, Irene remembers the day she fell, thinking, that was the day Father left for the battlefield. While I was lost in thought, someone suddenly pushed me from behind. Irene visualizes a tragic memory of her father riding on horseback, struck in the chest by an arrow on a snowy battlefield. In another heartbreaking memory, Irene recalls her father being unjustly accused of treason and chained up in a dark dungeon, thinking, my father was framed and imprisoned for 8 years. Irene remembers her grief as she cried under the shadow of her father's execution, thinking, I believed that if I just held on, the truth would eventually be revealed. But on the day I was about to give birth, she remembers the horrific timing of the execution. Father was executed the moment the charges were confirmed. Irene feels her soul gently descending back into her younger body on the bed, realizing she has been given a second chance at life. Snapping back to reality, Irene notices a strange scent in the bedroom and thinks, but something feels off. Why does this room smell so unfamiliar, a scent I've never breathed in before? Pointing toward the hanging incense burner, Irene asks, Catherine, may I take a look inside the incense burner? Examining the crushed leaves inside, Irene's eyes widen in anger as she thinks, this is wild fern, so that's why I was unconscious for 3 days. Someone tampered with the incense blend. Just then, voices call out from the hallway. Big Sis Irene, are you awake? Big Sis Irene, how are you feeling? Catherine looks toward the door in surprise and announces, that's Miss Yahello and Miss Ish. 2 pairs of elegant high heels click softly against the wooden floor as the visitors approach the bedroom door. Ish and Yahello Russell enter the room with deceptive smiles. As Yahello says, we were worried, so we came to see how she's doing. The 2 cousins peer over Catherine's shoulder at the bed, mockingly asking, Lady Irene, so is she awake yet? Quickly placing a finger over her lips, Irene orders, don't let anyone know I'm awake, prompting Catherine to lie to the guests, Lady Irene is still unconscious. Ish and Yahello exchange a suspicious and slightly disappointed look upon hearing Catherine's words. Pretentiously closing her eyes as she hears someone approaching, Irene thinks, that voice. Duchess Helen Russell enters the room as Sirius, the royal doctor, bows respectfully and says, yes, your grace. Looking at her mother, whom she had lost in her previous life, Irene suppresses her emotions and thinks, the mother who I grieved for so deeply in my previous life is now right in front of me, but I can't open my eyes just yet. As Sirius leans down to listen to her chest with a stethoscope, Irene grits her teeth in silent anger, thinking, this pervert. As the doctor pulls back her eyelid to examine her eyes, Irene recalls a critical piece of information from her past, thinking, if I remember correctly from my previous life, even if I didn't know who exactly was behind it, the person who had tampered with the incense was Sirius. Sirius turns to the Duchess with a grave, feigned expression and delivers his false diagnosis. Lady Irene's condition is quite serious. The pneumonia is severe. There's even a chance she may never wake up. Horrified by the news, Duchess Helen gasps, no, how could this happen? She's still so young, while Ish and Yahello pretend to weep into their handkerchiefs, crying, please wake up, sister. Overwhelmed by shock and grief, Duchess Helen collapses into the arms of her maids as Catherine and the staff shout in a panic, please calm down, your grace. Dr. Sirius instructs Catherine to take the Duchess back to her room so he can continue his examination, but a worried Catherine asks about Lady Irene's condition. With a stern and uncompromising look, Dr. Sirius commands Catherine to stop arguing and do as she is told, reiterating that Irene's condition is critical. As Catherine and another maid carry the Duchess away, Catherine looks back at the bed, feeling deeply uncertain about the doctor's claims. Catherine begins to grow suspicious, wondering how a supposedly brilliant physician like Dr. Sirius could fail to notice that Lady Irene is merely pretending to be unconscious. Lying still with her eyes closed, Irene reflects on her past life and realizes that Dr. Sirius's inability to see through her act proves he is nothing more than a fraud. Once Dr. Sirius leads the others out of the room, the cousins Ish and Yahello sneak back inside, approaching the bed with malicious grins to look closely at Irene. The 2 cousins stand over the bed, looking down coldly at the seemingly unconscious Irene, with expressions filled with jealousy and resentment. Irene remains completely motionless on the bed, her serene face resembling a sleeping princess amidst soft flowers. Gazing down with intense resentment, Ish mutters about how unfair it is that Irene's face remains completely unscathed despite falling onto a rocky lake bed. Ish's anger boils over as she compares herself to Irene, gritting her teeth in fury over why her cousin was blessed with beauty, brains, noble status, and everything else. Yahello chimes in with a cunning look, suggesting that if Irene's beautiful face were to be ruined, Cosmos would surely call off their upcoming engagement. The two cousins share a sinister, conspiratorial smile as they agree that destroying Irene's face would put an end to both her engagement and her marriage. Yahello mockingly recalls how Irene supposedly staged her drowning 3 days ago just to get Cosmos to rescue her, clutching her in his arms. Pretending to sleep, Irene listens to their venomous words, feeling sickened by how much she once admired people who could be so incredibly two-faced and cruel. Yahello sighs dramatically, claiming that Cosmos only treats Irene with kindness because of her beautiful face, and Vish venomously agrees. Clutching her fan, Ish's eyes glow with madness as she crazily wishes she had Irene's face so that she could claim Cosmos for herself. Yahello takes off her tiara, looking at it with a deceptively sweet expression as she prepares to execute her malicious plan. Holding the tiara with a dark, mocking smile, Yahello mockingly offers to gift her most treasured piece of jewelry to the unconscious Irene. Through her eyelashes, Irene watches as the sharp-edged shadow of the tiara looms menacingly closer and closer to her face. With a terrifyingly joyful expression, Ish raises the heavy, sharp tiara high above Irene's face, mocking how perfect it will look on her. Sensing the imminent danger, Irene tightly clenches her fist, frantically searching for a way to stop them without revealing that she is fully awake. With absolute malice in her eyes, Ish prepares to plunge the sharp, pointed ends of the tiara directly into Irene's face to ruin her beauty forever. Just as the weapon is about to strike, Ish is suddenly caught off guard by an unexpected shift in the room's atmosphere. Before Ish can strike, Irene quickly pulls a piece of the wild fern incense from her sleeve and blows the dust toward her, causing Ish to lose her footing and crash heavily onto Yahello instead. Yahello screams in pain and anger, accusing Ish of attacking her, while a startled Ish frantically protests her innocence, claiming she simply fell on her own. Refusing to believe her, Yahello's eyes burn with fury as she grabs Ish by the dress, accusing her of deliberately sabotaging her. Losing all control, Yahello fiercely lunges forward and swipes at Ish with the sharp edges of the tiara. Ish screams in pain as the sharp tiara slices across her face, leaving her clutching her cheek in absolute shock and fury at Yahello's violent assault. The confrontation quickly devolves into a chaotic and violent physical brawl, with Ish pulling Yahello's hair and screaming in rage while Yahello desperately tries to break free. Suddenly, the bedroom doors fly open and Madame Russell, Irene's imposing grandmother, enters with her maids, slamming her cane down as she furiously demands to know the source of the noise. The grandmother glares at the disheveled and brawling cousins, scolding them for acting so disgracefully and questioning how they could ever expect to be married with such behavior. Ish immediately points an accusing finger at Yahello, crying that she was attacked first, but Yahello instantly snaps back, telling her to stop blaming others for her own actions. Madame Russell's face contorts with disgust and disbelief as she looks at the petty, childish behavior of her granddaughters. Banging her cane on the floor, Madame Russell declares them both a complete disgrace to their families and bans them from attending dinner that night. The grandmother orders the maids not to clean the room and to shut the door immediately, before sternly directing the injured cousins to go find Dr. Sirius for an examination. The bedroom door is firmly shut and locked, leaving Irene's chambers in complete silence once again. Sitting up in her bed, Irene sadly notes that her grandmother seems more worried about the cousins than her, but she feels relieved that she used Sirius's incense to make Ish hallucinate, thereby protecting her own face. Determined to take action, Irene carefully swings her legs over the edge of the bed and prepares to sneak out of her room. Dressed in her pink nightgown, Irene quietly tiptoes across the spacious bedroom, keeping her movements as silent as possible. Slowly cracking open the heavy wooden door, Irene peeks into the long, empty stone corridor of the estate to ensure the coast is clear. As Irene runs down the hallway, she remembers with grief that in her past life, the shock of her coma caused her pregnant mother to suffer a miscarriage and subsequent decline in health. Driven by fierce resolve, Irene runs desperately through the corridors, vowing that this time she will protect her mother and her unborn sibling at all costs. As she approaches her mother's chambers, Irene suddenly stops and presses herself against the stone wall, hearing suspicious voices whispering from inside. Peeking through a small crack in the door, Irene's eye widens in absolute shock and horror at what she witnesses inside her mother's room. Inside the dimly lit room, Dr. Sirius stands over the sleeping Duchess, holding a smoking incense burner right above her, prompting Irene to wonder what he is doing to her mother. A wave of sheer dread washes over Irene as a terrifying realization begins to dawn on her. Irene's mind reels in horror as she finally connects the dots, realizing that Dr. Sirius was the one who deliberately caused her mother's miscarriage in her past life. Hearing Dr. Sirius agree to leave, Irene quickly hides as the doctor walks out of the room, leaving her mother's chambers unattended. Slipping into the room, Irene rushes to her mother's side and checks her pulse, realizing that her mother is still fine and that Sirius likely doesn't know about the pregnancy yet. Gently placing a hand on her mother's forehead, Irene tearfully blames herself for her mother's pale and feverish state, but feels relieved that there are no severe abnormalities and she should wake up soon. Looking at her mother's weak, feverish state, Irene sheds silent tears, crying out for her in her heart. Looking back on her past life, Irene remembers with deep regret that it has been 8 long years since she was last able to see her mother's face. Following her father's imprisonment, Irene's mother was confined to the house under the guise of poor health, with her strict grandmother warning her never to leave without permission. Filled with remorse, Irene reflects on how selfishly she behaved in her previous life, blindly believing that her grandmother and the rest of the household were taking proper care of her mother. In a poignant memory of her past life, Irene remembers rushing to her pregnant mother, desperately calling out to her. With overwhelming sorrow, Irene recalls how her mother was kept entirely isolated in a neglected, web-covered room, unable to even attend her own daughter's wedding. Overcome with grief and shame, Irene covers her tear-streaked face, weeping at the realization of how ungrateful of a daughter she had been. As Irene sits weeping at her mother's bedside, Duchess Helen suddenly gasps and opens her eyes, starting to wake up. Still crying as she calls out to her mother, Irene is startled as the Duchess suddenly bolts upright in bed, calling out Irene's name in pure shock. Staring at her mother awake and alive in front of her, Irene's eyes fill with tears of relief and deep emotion. Mother and daughter pull each other into a desperate, tearful embrace, with Irene crying out as she clutches her mother tightly. Weeping tears of joy, Duchess Helen holds Irene close, thanking goodness that her precious daughter is safe and alive. Irene recalls Dr. Sirius's grim, deceitful diagnosis from earlier, where he falsely claimed that her pneumonia was severe and that she might never wake up. Holding her daughter tightly, Duchess Helen tearfully admits that she was terrified Irene would never wake up from her coma. Hugging her mother back, Irene looks serious as she reveals a dark truth. Actually, that day, someone pushed me from behind. Shocked by the revelation, Duchess Helen pulls back to look at Irene, her expression turning incredibly grave. With an intense and serious look, the Duchess demands to know the truth, urging Irene to explain exactly what happened. Realizing the danger they are in, the Duchess clutches Irene's hands and suggests fleeing to a small house she owns in the village, noting that it is no longer safe to stay here. The Duchess urges Irene to use the fact that everyone thinks she is still in a coma to slip away quietly, but Irene insists that her mother must come along with her. Looking at her mother, Irene vows to herself that someone as kind and noble as her mother will not suffer the same tragic, untimely death as in her previous life. Sensing her daughter's hesitation, Duchess Helen asks what is wrong when Irene suddenly pauses and says, "But..." With a fierce and determined look in her eyes, Irene declares that she refuses to run away like a coward and intends to leave a little gift behind for their enemies. Irene takes out a stunning blue gemstone necklace, recalling that while she was thrilled to receive this betrothal gift from Cosmos in her past life, she now knows its true, sinister nature. Irene remembers how coldly Cosmos looked at her in her past life, mocking her supposed innocence and dismissing her as nothing but a foolish, naive girl. Recalling her past misery, Irene remembers the terrifying red eyes of the woman who orchestrated her downfall, making her shiver with intense trauma and hatred. Seething with anger, Irene tosses the cursed blue necklace aside, remembering the moment a shadowy thief sneaked into her room, panicking that they had been caught. As a mysterious figure quickly flees through the window, a startled Irene turns her head, wondering who the intruder could possibly be. Suddenly, her personal maid Linda stands frozen in comedic shock, dropping her arms and screaming, "My lady?" while Irene looks back with a blank, deadpan expression. Springing to action, Irene quickly covers Linda's mouth to silence her, urging her to keep her awakening an absolute secret. Once she calms down, Linda, Irene's dedicated personal maid, worriedly explains that she snuck in because she was deeply concerned, despite the grandmother's strict orders banning anyone from entering. Looking at Linda, Irene recalls that her father had rescued her from a battlefield as a child and brought her home, despite her not being of noble birth. Reflecting on her past life, Irene remembers how close they became, eventually making Linda her personal maid, but she wonders if she can truly trust her this time since Linda was also imprisoned alongside her father. Sitting gracefully in her chair, Irene points to the blue necklace on her desk and directly asks Linda if she was indeed the one who delivered it to her on Cosmos' behalf. Looking slightly nervous, Linda confirms that she received the necklace from another maid named Winter, who claimed it was a special gift from Lord Cosmos. Linda asks with concern if there is something wrong with the necklace, as Irene gazes at it with a contemplative, analytical expression. Irene narrows her blue eyes, deep in thought as she begins to piece together the inconsistencies of her past life. Irene realizes how bizarre it was that Cosmos supposedly sent her a token of love before they had even officially met, questioning why anyone would send such a gift to a stranger. Irene remembers that although she admired Cosmos from afar back then, her pride as the daughter of the noble Russell family kept her from ever actively trying to approach him. Gesturing toward the glittering blue necklace, Irene tests Linda, asking her if she would have accepted the token on her behalf if Cosmos had presented it directly. Linda immediately denies it with absolute sincerity and sweat on her brow, stating she would never do such a thing behind her lady's back. Irene then asks if Winter was also the one responsible for changing the incense in her room, and Linda confirms that Winter did so every single day. Placing her hand under her chin, Irene reflects on how Sirius's poisonous incense was delivered to her room daily by Winter. With a cold and calculating plan in mind, Irene instructs Linda to secretly bring both Winter and Catherine to her chambers. Carrying a lantern, Catherine leads the maids through a dark, secret stone corridor of the estate, whispering about the hidden passage. The maid Winter complains about having to use a dusty underground passage to visit Lady Irene secretly when they could have just climbed through the window. Before Winter can finish her sentence, Linda suddenly delivers a harsh kick from behind, sending Winter crashing heavily onto the stone floor. Groaning in pain, a startled Winter demands to know what they are doing, only to freeze in absolute terror as she looks up and sees Lady Irene sitting regally in the shadows. Sitting elegantly with her legs crossed, Irene looks down at the treacherous maid with a chilling, knowing smile. Horrified to see that Irene is already awake, Winter quickly tries to feign relief, but Irene coldly ignores her act and commands Linda to show Winter her gift. With a swift and powerful throw, Linda hurls the cursed blue gemstone necklace directly at Winter's face, causing the deceitful maid to scream in pain. Standing tall, Linda stares down at the trembling maid Winter, demanding to know where she got the cursed blue gemstone necklace. Winter points a trembling finger in desperation, falsely claiming she only delivered the necklace at Lord Cosmos's request, but Linda instantly catches her in the lie. Furious at the blatant attempt to frame her, Linda delivers a swift and powerful slap that sends the treacherous maid crashing to the ground. Ruthlessly kicking the crying maid, Linda reprimands her for betraying the family after all the kindness shown to her, while Winter desperately begs for mercy. Sitting calmly in the shadows, Lady Irene watches the scene unfold and quietly tells Linda not to be too angry with her. Exuding a chilling, commanding presence, Lady Irene questions Winter if she truly believed her disloyalty would remain hidden, leaving the maid frozen in pure panic. Terrified, Winter confesses that Dr. Sirius ordered her to place the poisonous incense in Lady Irene's room daily, only for Irene to coldly state she was never informed of such a thing. Irene leans in close, narrowing her eyes as she confronts Winter with the dark truth that she knew the incense was deadly all along. Caught in her own web of lies, Winter looks down at the floor in guilty, sweating silence, unable to offer any defense. Irene pulls out a long white silk ribbon, declaring with a cold smile that this will be their very last meeting.
Catherine and Linda look on in utter shock, wondering what dark punishment Lady Irene is about to execute.
In stark contrast to her innocent past, a dark, murderous aura now surrounds Lady Irene as she sits regally on her chair, holding the ribbon of fate. Winter desperately begs for her life, but Irene looks down at her with cold indifference, stating that the maid has deeply hurt her family. Irene stares intensely at Linda and Catherine, warning them that they must adapt to this ruthless lifestyle if they wish to remain loyal to her. Stepping forward with absolute determination, Linda takes the ribbon from Irene, declaring that she will perform the deed. Linda wraps the silk ribbon tightly around Winter's neck, ignoring the maid's desperate gasp as she begins to strangle her. Working in tandem, Linda pulls the ribbon with all her might while Catherine holds the struggling maid down on the cold stone floor. Winter's eyes widen in absolute terror as she gasps for air under the crushing grip of the ribbon. Slowly, Winter's body stops struggling, and her foot falls limp as silence descends upon the room. Sensing the end of the struggle, Lady Irene quietly commands Linda to let go. Exhausted and breathless, Linda and Catherine collapse beside the motionless maid, their hearts pounding in the silent corridor. Kneeling beside the unconscious maid, Lady Irene gently presses her fingers against Winter's neck to check for a pulse. A dark, bruised ring is left behind on Winter's neck where the ribbon had been pulled tight. Satisfied, Irene looks up with a sly smile, praising Linda for stopping at the perfect moment as Winter is still breathing. Linda stares back at her lady in absolute shock, stunned by how meticulously Irene had calculated the entire punishment. Catherine worriedly asks why they did not just kill her, but Irene explains that without a formal confession, they cannot completely confirm her as the traitor. With Winter rendered completely unconscious on the floor, Linda quietly obeys her lady's plan. Irene commands her servants to take the unconscious maid back to her room, leaving the evidence of their work hidden. As morning breaks, Lady Irene lies peacefully in her bed while maids outside whisper about being allowed inside on the madam's orders. Catherine bursts into the room in a frantic rush while Linda carefully closes the grand doors behind her. Leaning in close, Catherine whispers the morning's shocking news into Lady Irene's ear. Hearing the news, Lady Irene smiles triumphantly, realizing that someone has already received the gift she left behind. Recognizing that exposing the truth is the most effective way to prevent further harm, Irene calmly observes the shock reactions of the two women, asking if they are truly unsurprised as the realization of a deeper conspiracy begins to dawn on them. Understanding that prompting others to think critically serves the greater interest of uncovering the truth, the beautiful physician looks on with a confident smile and simply asks, "What do you think?" Realizing the tragic cost of this conspiracy, the blonde woman asks in horror if Winter was murdered simply to keep her quiet, recognizing the cold-blooded calculation used to protect the conspirators' interests at the expense of human life. Irene deduces that the masterminds behind the plot assumed Winter had confessed under torture, prompting them to sneak in and finish her off to erase any loose ends. A cold, calculating look crosses Irene's face as she notes that the longer their enemies wait, the more anxious they will become from not knowing what Winter revealed. Stunned by her lady's strategic brilliance, Catherine admits that Irene's thorough planning is almost terrifying. Clasping her hands together with a serene smile, Irene states that Winter was merely the appetizer and the main course is still to come. Under the cover of night, a mysterious cloaked figure deftly slips through the high window of the estate, bypassing the castle guards. The cloaked intruder sneaks into Dr. Sirius's private apothecary, surrounded by shelves of chemical reagents and potion vials. With careful precision, the intruder pours a mysterious liquid from a small bottle into a luxurious face powder container. Pulling back her hood, Lady Irene reveals her beautiful face and glowing blue eyes, holding the poison with a look of sweet revenge. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoes through the dressing room as a maid frantically asks her lady what is wrong. Looking in the mirror, the noblewoman gasps in horror as her skin begins to tingle and burn. Swatting the makeup container away, she demands to know what Dr. Sirius put on her face as an unbearable itch begins to spread. The dressing room descends into absolute chaos as the ladies claw at their own faces in agony while the strict grandmother watches in horror. Pointing accusingly, the furious grandmother demands to know what kind of cursed medicine Sirius applied to their faces. Trembling in panic, Dr. Sirius frantically defends his potion, claiming it is a highly regarded facial treatment used by the royal family itself. Crying tears of agony, the distressed ladies crowd around the grandmother, begging for help as they feel like tearing their own skin off. A blood-stained hand reaches out and grabs the grandmother's pristine gown, leaving a terrifying smudge of blood. The grandmother looks down at her ruined dress with an expression of pure shock, disgust, and rising fury. Brandishing her cane, the grandmother commands Sirius to fix the disaster immediately, but the disgraced doctor drops to his knees, admitting he has no idea how to cure it. Pointing an accusing finger, the furious noblewoman Helene confronts the sweating Dr. Sirius, demanding to know what he has done. Helene reprimands him coldly, pointing out that the Russell family spent an absolute fortune to make him a great doctor, and yet this disaster is the best he can do? Standing nearby, the stern grandmother looks on with a sweating, tense face and asks Helene why she has suddenly arrived. Arriving promptly at the chaotic scene, Irene's mother looks down disdainfully at the kneeling physician, declaring that a doctor who cannot comprehend a medical disaster of his own making is utterly disgraceful, and vows never to leave her daughter in his hands. Facing the strict matriarch directly, Irene's mother remains completely resolute as she announces her decision to take Irene back to the William household immediately. Although the furious grandmother retorts that it is not her choice to make, Irene's mother stands her ground, declaring that as Irene's mother, she alone will decide who her daughter's doctor is, leaving Dr. Sirius trembling in sheer terror. Pointing aggressively at Helene, the grandmother warns her that Irene is a child of the Russell family, questioning how she expects to explain things to Bowen if anything happens to her. With a cold and dark gaze, Helene retorts that the doctor the grandmother chose claims Irene has little chance of waking up, while her precious granddaughters cause a scene in the resting room, not to mention that Irene's maid, Winter, was just murdered. Helene pressures the grandmother, asking how she plans to explain all of this to Lord Bowen, leaving the old woman sweating in sheer shock and panic. Meanwhile, the two distressed noblewomen collapse to the floor in tears, desperately clutching their grandmother's dress and crying out for help as their skin continues to burn. Gritting her teeth in blinding rage at the physician's utter failure, the grandmother commands her servants in a booming voice to bring her a whip immediately. In a comical fit of fury, the grandmother relentlessly whips the weeping Dr. Sirius on the floor, calling him a worthless brat, while the distressed ladies continue to cry over their ruined skin in the background. Turning away with cold authority, Helene commands Catherine to prepare the carriage immediately so they can leave the estate. Outside the estate, under a bright sky, a grand carriage stands ready as Helene and Catherine prepare to depart. Peering coldly through the carriage curtains as it clatters along, young Irene thinks to herself that all of this ruin is entirely of her enemy's own doing. As the grand carriages depart through the estate's iron gates, Lady Irene looks back on the departure, reflecting on the terrible sins her enemies committed against her in her previous life as her quest for revenge begins. Smiling brightly inside the moving carriage, young Irene high-fives her mother Helene, triumphantly declaring that this is just the beginning of their plan. Irene stares thoughtfully down, wondering if her mother will believe her medical diagnosis of pregnancy, especially since her mother does not know she studied medicine in her previous life. In an adorable chibi scene, Irene sits on the couch and animatedly explains the situation to a completely shocked Linda and Catherine. Stunned by the sudden revelation, a chibi Helene holds a kitchen pot with a completely blank, bewildered expression on her face. In a peaceful valley, a large military or medical campsite is set up with multiple white tents, horses, and carriages bustling under a bright blue sky. Linda enters the tent, coughing politely as she announces to Helene that she has brought a doctor to examine her. A beautiful young doctor with dark hair and striking blue eyes politely asks Helene for permission to perform a medical examination. After a few minutes pass, a voice calls out from inside the tent, welcoming the doctor to enter. Bowing politely, the young doctor enters the tent accompanied by Linda, while Helene and Catherine, who is disguised in a long blonde wig, watch closely. Flashing a dazzling and charming smile, the handsome young doctor introduces himself as Arion, politely asking what symptoms Helene is experiencing. Completely starstruck by the doctor's handsome looks, Catherine blushes furiously with sparkles in her eyes, leaving Helene staring in silent disbelief. As the young doctor leans in close to examine her neck, Helene feels slightly flustered, thinking how unexpected it is to find such a young and skilled doctor in a rural place. While the chibi doctor mixes a sample belonging to Helene with Linda's help, Helene stares at him suspiciously, realizing he looks identical to Irene and wondering where Catherine went. The doctor joyfully announces that Helene's symptoms are actually due to pregnancy, but a furious Helene suddenly pinches his ear, yelling Irene's name and demanding to know what is going on. Kneeling guiltily on the floor, chibi Linda, Irene, and Catherine, who is now holding her blonde wig, are reprimanded by Helene, who demands to know the truth behind their disguise. Dropping the disguise, Irene explains that she only wanted to check on her mother before rushing to the battlefield, warning Helene that her father is in grave danger. Irene stands tall with absolute determination inside the tent, repeating that she must go to the battlefield immediately to save her father. Looking incredibly worried and sweating, Helene asks her daughter how she could possibly know about such danger. Irene reveals that she accidentally read the secret letter her father had sent, which leaves Helene completely stunned. Holding up the opened letter with its red wax seal, Irene points out that the timing of her father's letter is highly suspicious. Looking over the letter, Helene realizes Irene is correct, noting that her husband had barely reached the battlefield when the letter was supposedly sent out. Irene explains that although the handwriting is similar, the writing style is completely different, suggesting the enemy fabricated the letter to issue false military commands under her father's name. Grabbing Irene's shoulder, Helene frantically tells her daughter to head to the safe William estate instead, declaring that she will go to the battlefield herself. Irene firmly refuses, looking her mother in the eyes and insisting that she must be the one to go. Holding her mother's hands gently, Irene looks at Helene with a sorrowful yet incredibly resolute expression. Irene explains that since there are no male heirs, the grandmother has always planned to hand down the family title to their uncle instead. Irene warns her mother that if the grandmother finds out about her pregnancy, there is no telling what she might do, emphasizing that fighting without power is a dangerous battle. Helene looks at her daughter with wide, emotional eyes, deeply touched by how mature and protective her child has grown to be. Helping her mother sit down to rest, Irene urges her to take care, while Helene asks how she managed to learn medicine in secret. Irene reminds Helene of when she was severely ill at age 8 and treated at the military hospital by Dr. Sean. Looking sorrowful, Irene confesses that back then she was absolutely terrified that her mother was going to die. A flashback shows young Irene standing by her mother's bedside in a dark room, watching her mother suffer when no normal hospitals could cure her. She recalls how Dr. Sean miraculously saved Helene with a single injection, which felt exactly like magic to her young eyes. To learn this life-saving magic, young Irene decided to disguise herself as a boy, asking Catherine to act as her substitute at home. She explains that she took on the male alias Arion William and successfully became Dr. Sean's medical pupil. Irene recalls how she worked diligently as an assistant in the understaffed hospital, where Dr. Sean recognized her potential and taught her everything he knew. Under his guidance, young Irene proudly learned the art of medicine, paving the way for her secret role as a doctor. Amazed by her daughter's secret past, Helene asks if she studied medicine for over a year and if the doctor knew her secret, noting how society heavily scorns female doctors. Irene chuckles softly, explaining that society's prejudice against women in medicine is precisely why she had to disguise herself as a man. Irene fondly remembers Dr. Sean smiling warmly and placing a reassuring hand on her head, acknowledging her hard work. Irene promises her mother that she will stop working as a doctor and live as a proper noble daughter once they return home, prompting Helene to sigh in understanding. Helene asks Irene if she is keeping any other secrets from her, and Irene, deep in thought, wonders about the secrets her mother is still completely unaware of. In a somber reflection of her previous life, Irene recalls how her father was falsely accused of being a traitor, her mother suffered a miscarriage, and her grandmother ruthlessly controlled her entire life, leaving Cosmos as her only light. Under the male disguise of the military Dr. Arion, Irene was able to study under Dr. Sean for 4 more years and spend 3 years investigating the incident, leading up to the fateful day she planned to prove her father's innocence. Although Irene initially believed everything was going to be fine when she happily discovered she was pregnant, things soon took a dark and tragic turn. Trapped by betrayal, Irene recalls the horrific tragedy where her father was executed after 7 years in prison. Her mother died from the trauma, the family portrait was burned to ashes, and she tragically lost her unborn child. Irene is brought to tears by the weight of these painful memories from her past life, prompting her concerned mother to ask her what is wrong. Helene wraps her arms around her weeping daughter, offering a warm and comforting embrace as she promises to always stay by her side. Holding Irene tightly inside the quiet tent, Helene reassures her daughter that she and the others will always be there to support her. Ready to depart, Irene announces that she must leave now, while a deeply worried Helene tells her to be extremely careful. Looking incredibly determined, Irene tells her mother not to worry, promising that she will make absolutely sure to return safely with her father. Before she leaves, Irene hands her mother a small card, instructing her to visit this specific person if she ever needs another medical checkup. Helene looks closely at the green pharmacist card, reading the name Victor Murphy of the Pine Reel Pharmacy, and promises to keep him in mind. Helene gently takes off a stunning necklace from her own neck, telling Irene that she has a parting gift to give her. Fastening the beautiful necklace around Irene's neck, Helene makes her daughter promise never to take it off, wishing for it to act as a powerful lucky charm. Outside in the sunlit military campsite, Irene prepares to set off on her journey as Helene, Linda, and Catherine gather to bid her a safe farewell. Helene smiles warmly and thanks Dr. Arion, noting how much lighter her body feels, before instructing the maids to send her off safely. Coughing politely to maintain her calm disguise, Irene bids them a formal farewell as she prepares to depart with the guard. Catherine, disguised in her maid outfit, guides Irene away from the camp as Irene cheerfully complies. Seeing the handsome doctor walk away, the starstruck camp maids swoon over how lovely and gorgeous he is, wondering where such a doctor could have come from. As they walk, Irene prays silently to herself that no one on the battlefield will recognize her true identity under her disguise. Feeling proud of her disguise, Irene triumphantly poses while Chibi Catherine and Linda cheer her on, praising her perfect disguising skills. Looking back at Catherine and Linda, Irene asks them to look after her mother, and they readily promise that she can count on them. Catherine and Linda wrap Irene in a sudden, emotional group hug, deeply saddened to see her leave for such a dangerous place. Waving a cheerful goodbye, Irene walks down the dirt path under a beautiful sky as Catherine and Linda wave back from the hill. Looking back one last time, Irene thinks a quiet, sorrowful goodbye as she sets off on her journey. Arriving at the beautiful, timber-framed streets of Pine Reel Village, Irene stands before a grand white stone building, realizing there is something crucial she must do before heading to the battlefield. Inside a quiet, rustic apothecary, a ruggedly handsome young man with reddish-brown hair chops herbs with a massive knife, looking up in surprise. Taking a puff from his pipe, the handsome young man smiles knowingly, guessing that his visitor is looking for some highly valuable herbs. Suddenly cornering Irene against the wall, the muscular apothecary leans in close with a mischievous grin, demanding to know if she has money on her. Leaning in shockingly close, the man whispers Irene's true name, leaving her completely stunned and wide-eyed in absolute disbelief. Trapped against the wooden wall, Irene looks up in utter shock as the smug man enjoys her flustered reaction. Blushing furiously and sweating, Irene realizes her disguise was completely useless against him. With a bright, teasing smile, the man remarks that it is obvious to him, declaring that no matter what kind of disguise she wears, it will never work on him. Dropping to one knee, the handsome apothecary bows deeply and places a hand over his heart in a mock theatrical gesture of respect to his lady. Flustered in a cute chibi style, Irene aggressively pulls at him and demands that he cut it out, terrified that someone else might find out her secret. Victor scratches his head in confusion, asking if he isn't allowed to show respect, while Irene smiles and affectionately thinks that he's just as stupid as ever. Irene fondly recalls a childhood flashback where they worked on potions together, remembering how she used to yell at a suit-stained Victor for being a stupid assistant. Victor smirks back playfully, teasing Irene that she is in absolutely no position to call him stupid. In another adorable flashback, young Irene demands to know how Victor figured out she was actually a girl, to which he smugly points out that she always sits down to pee. Back in the present, Victor smiles warmly and comments on how nostalgic those childhood days were, and Irene happily agrees. Leaning casually against the counter, Victor notes that Irene must have a very serious reason for coming all this way in such a disguise, saying he will call her Airy like the old days. Looking more serious, Victor asks her straight out why she has suddenly come to his pharmacy if it isn't just to reminisce about the good old days. Confirming his suspicion, Irene says she will speak frankly since they are alone and slams her heavy leather bag onto the counter, begging for his help. Victor's eyes widen in sheer shock as he looks down at the bag, wondering what could possibly be inside. Irene opens the bag to reveal a glittering fortune in dazzling gold, emerald, and ruby jewelry, declaring she brought every single valuable she owns. Swooning over the glittering gems, Victor eagerly agrees to help, but a smiling Irene tells him to calm down, warning him that he must listen to her request first. Standing among the potion shelves, Victor agrees to the arrangement, confirming that he will go and examine Madame Russell. Victor thoughtfully strokes his chin, noting that the highly valuable herb thistle is extremely rare in the village, wishing he could check the imperial hunting grounds. Turning around to search the high cabinets, Victor explains that while he doesn't have thistle right now, he has something else that might interest her. Setting a sturdy, brass-handled wooden medicine chest on the counter, Victor invites her to take a look, leaving Irene staring with wide, sparkly eyes of anticipation. Irene looks down in absolute awe at the open medical chest, which is beautifully filled with specialized tools, bottles of medicine, and a large syringe, as Victor explains that he crafted it all based on the diagrams and records left behind by Dr. Sean. Victor smiles warmly, confessing that while his medical abilities might not be the best, he is highly confident in his crafting skills, assuring her that she can use the medical chest without any worries. Overwhelmed with joy and gratitude, Irene throws her arms around a surprised Victor in a tight, emotional hug, loudly declaring how incredibly happy she is and how much she loves her new medical chest. Looking up with a bright, beaming smile that warms Victor's heart, Irene happily expresses her deepest gratitude, thanking him for his wonderful gift. Victor freezes as his face flushes red from the sudden embrace, his heart beating rapidly in embarrassment before he smiles softly, completely charmed by her reaction. Preparing to set off, Irene cheerfully waves goodbye as she announces that she is going to try her luck at the Imperial hunting grounds, leaving Victor utterly bewildered and questioning her sudden departure. Victor calls out in concern, asking if she is really planning on leaving so soon. Before Irene can make a run for it, Victor quickly catches up and grabs her bag, asking her what is wrong and why she is in such a massive hurry. Blushing slightly, Victor shyly suggests that they should at least have a warm meal together before she sets off on her dangerous journey. Nervous and sweating under her disguise, Irene politely declines the invitation, explaining that she has urgent matters to attend to and must head straight to Amberlin. Hearing her destination, Victor looks down with a saddened, disappointed expression, quietly accepting her departure. Standing grandly in the heart of Pinereel Village is Amberlin, the village's popular social meeting place and a highly bustling entertainment spot. Arriving at Enrollment, Irene is politely guided inside by a host, feeling incredibly nervous as she reflects on how this is her very first time visiting such a lively establishment. Stepping through the doors, Irene is amazed by the lively, bustling atmosphere of the Grand Tavern, which is filled to the brim with elegant guests, talking, drinking, and laughing. A group of beautiful, elegantly dressed women immediately approaches Irene, warmly welcoming her as they offer to guide her inside and teach her all about the tavern's pleasures. Flustered by their forwardness, Irene sweat drops and politely holds up her hands, asking if she can simply have a menu since she is only there for a quick meal. The women's welcoming smiles instantly vanish into dark expressions of utter disappointment, scoffing at the fact that such a handsome, petite young man is only interested in food. Seated at a quiet table, Irene happily digs into a plate of steak, french fries, and a fried egg, pleasantly surprised by how delicious the food tastes after her long journey. Taking a bite of her steak, Irene's eyes turn sharp and focused as she carefully scans the crowded tavern, noting that the great visibility from her seat will make it easy to spot her target. Across the tavern, several creepy and wealthy patrons stare at Irene with predatory grins, whispering about how brave the pretty boy is to eat all alone and scheming to take advantage of his petite appearance. Licking his lips with a disgusting, drooling grin, a grotesque noble remarks on how feminine and beautiful Irene's disguised face looks. Looking completely green and nauseous, Chibi Irene shudders in pure disgust, feeling incredibly sick to her stomach from the patron's disturbing glares. Taking a tense sip of her red wine, Irene tells herself to endure the unpleasant atmosphere, lamenting that there are only weird and creepy guests on the first floor. Suddenly feeling an intense gaze from above, Irene looks up to the second-floor balcony and freezes in shock as she spots a handsome, wavy-haired blonde man smiling down at her, whom she recognizes as Prince Ivan Montgomery of the Wisteria Kingdom. In sheer, unmitigated shock, Irene spits her wine out in a massive spray, lightning crackling in the background as her mind reels from the unexpected encounter. Instantly triggered by a painful flashback from her past life, Irene recalls how Prince Ivan had furiously accused her father of treason after the Regent King's death, leaving her panicking over why she had to run into him of all people. Up on the balcony, Prince Ivan looks down in utter disbelief and anger, wondering if the strange young brat really just spit out his drink right after they made eye contact. Infuriated by the perceived disrespect, Prince Ivan slams his hands on the balcony railing and yells down at Irene to hold on. As Prince Ivan storms down the stairs to confront her, Irene is suddenly grabbed from behind by a massive muscular bouncer, leaving her sweating in panic as she realizes her money is completely gone. Terrified that she cannot pay for her meal because she gave all her gold to Victor, Irene panics, while Ivan smugly assumes that she is simply fixing her hair to impress his handsome self. Striking a dramatic, arrogant pose, Prince Ivan loudly boasts that he isn't surprised by her reaction, declaring himself to be the most handsome and charming man in the entire kingdom. Ivan calls out to a mysterious figure sitting in the shadows of the second floor, asking for agreement, while a shocked Irene gasps as she realizes she has finally located her main target. Looking up with intense determination, Irene stares toward the balcony as Ivan continues to ramble, her heart pounding with the realization that she has finally found him. Staring at the quiet figure on the balcony, Irene recalls with deep bitterness how this man was a key figure in her past life who used his immense power to guarantee her father's execution. Sitting elegantly in a plush armchair surrounded by beautiful purple flowers is the mysterious man in a black masquerade mask, whose true identity is the feared chief of the Wisteria Information Bureau, known as a demon who terrifies enemy nations. Behind his black mask, the chief's piercing violet eyes gleam with dangerous amusement as he quietly observes the commotion below. A somber flashback reveals a noble knight being shot through the chest with a deadly arrow while on horseback, a tragic incident that Irene's father was falsely accused of masterminding. Irene remembers how Prince Ivan, devastated by the loss of his dear friend Weiss, had ruthlessly accused her father of treason, leaving her with a grim determination to never forgive his actions. Back in the present, the muscular bouncer demands immediate payment for the meal, while a smug Prince Ivan watches the broke young doctor struggle. Desperate, Irene draws her highly valuable ornamental dagger from her belt, offering it as payment, but the bouncer rudely waves his hand and demands cash only. The bouncer raises his voice angrily, towering over Irene as he yells that she isn't allowed to leave the tavern until she pays for her food. Seeing her struggle, the surrounding tavern guests begin to mock and snicker at Irene, whispering that she is nothing more than a broke playboy pretending to be a rich kid. Sensing an opportunity, several creepy nobles crowd around Irene with sly grins, offering to pay for her meal if she sells them her dagger or agrees to go upstairs with them. Leaning in shockingly close with drool dripping from his mouth, a disgusting noble whispers a creepy invitation to go upstairs for a chat, leaving a sweating Irene struggling to hold back her temper. Suddenly, Prince Ivan steps in and shoves the creepy noble's face away, teasingly offering to give the broke young boy a chance to get out of trouble. As Ivan poses dramatically and the angry crowd shouts at him for interfering, Irene's patience completely snaps and she decides she can no longer tolerate this ridiculous situation. High above on the balcony, the masked chief quietly watches the chaotic scene unfold, while Irene glares up at him in tense silence. Looking at the quiet chief, Irene notes that despite the loud, chaotic crowd surrounding her, he is the only one who looks completely detached, as if he belongs to an entirely different world. Gazing at her target, a brilliant idea suddenly flashes through Irene's mind on how she can use the chaotic prince to her advantage. Grinning with mischievous determination, Irene suddenly charges forward and shoves Prince Ivan out of her way, using him as a shield to escape the angry crowd. Running through the tavern to reach the balcony, Irene is determined to catch his attention, thinking to herself that if he won't look her way, she will force herself into his sight. She confidently stands before the seated chief and calls out, "Isn't that right, Weiss?" Leaning in close, Irene calls him Big Brother and points directly at his chest, declaring with a bold look that he won't live for very long. The surrounding tavern patrons stare in stunned silence, while behind the dark-haired chief's chair, two of his hidden knights prepare to draw their swords in response to the perceived threat. As the knights draw their weapons, a surprised chibi Irene panics upon realizing they were hidden there all along, sweating as she wonders if these are the infamous Regent King's knights and telling herself that the situation is incredibly bad. Behind his black masquerade mask, the chief quietly observes her and remarks, "Judging by the medical kit on your back, you must be a doctor." Leaning forward with a polite but intimidating gesture, the masked chief suggests, "If that's what you say, how about giving me a proper checkup?" Standing up, the massive chief towers over Irene, calmly proposing that if she finds anything wrong, he will pay her consultation fee, leaving her completely overwhelmed by his giant stature and terrifyingly powerful presence. Forcing a polite smile, Irene agrees to the checkup, feeling relieved that her plan is going well so far and hoping that she can get her meal paid for while ensuring he remembers her face. A grand, wide shot reveals the massive tavern crowded with elegant guests, all watching the unusual confrontation taking place on the second-floor balcony. Preparing to examine him, Irene nervously asks if he really plans to get examined in front of everyone, but the chief simply unbuttons his shirt to expose his chest, declaring, "The brighter the better, right?" leaving a chibi Irene blushing furiously in sheer embarrassment. Pressing her ear against his bare chest, Irene quietly listens to his heartbeat as she politely tells him, "Well then, excuse me for a moment." Looking down at her, the chibi chief asks, "So, do you find anything wrong with my body?" as chibi Irene blushes red up to her ears while leaning on him. Thinking it over, chibi Irene is determined to find a medical flaw, telling herself that there absolutely has to be a problem, since being too healthy would ruin her excuse. Clearing her throat with a cough, Irene puts on a serious doctor's face and prepares to deliver her diagnosis, saying, "This is, in other words..." Irene mentally reviews his traits, noting his pale skin since birth, his bloodless lips, which aren't actually that bad, and his calm, unresponsive pupils, synthesizing her findings. Looking him straight in the eyes, Irene confidently declares, "Without a doubt, you're short-lived," while the silent chief begins to button up his shirt in response. Behind his back, the hooded knights pull out their swords in a furious rage at her insolence, while the tavern guests watch the unfolding drama like they're eating popcorn. Without looking back, the masked chief calmly raises his hand to stop his knights from attacking. Looking at Irene with interest, the chief asks, "Is there a way to cure it?" Reaching into her medical chest, Irene confidently pulls out a small glass bottle filled with blue liquid and declares, "Of course there is." Holding out her palm, Irene presents a bottle labeled sleeping medicine alongside a handwritten prescription note that reads, "Prescription, early to bed, early to rise." Sweat dropping, chibi Irene sighs to herself, admitting in her thoughts that other than mild insomnia symptoms, she couldn't find a single thing wrong with his perfectly healthy body. Suddenly, an outraged Prince Ivan storms over, slamming his hands down as he yells, "Enough with the jokes! Do you know who you're talking to?" While the chibi knights cheer him on, praising the prince for putting the doctor in his place. Gritting his teeth in a competitive fury, Prince Ivan demands that Irene hurry up and come over to him. Posing dramatically as flower petals drift around him, Prince Ivan aggressively rips his shirt open, shouting, "Let's see who's got the better body." While the knights spit out their drinks in sheer disbelief at the prince's ridiculous jealousy, the other wealthy male patrons in the tavern are instantly triggered, ripping open their own shirts and clamoring to be examined next. As buttons and coins fly everywhere from the shirtless crowd, Irene stands frozen in absolute disgust and annoyance, muttering, "Ugh." Realizing the situation has devolved into complete madness, Irene grabs a test tube filled with glowing green liquid from her chest, muttering that she can no longer handle this ridiculous situation. Irene smashes the glass tube onto the floor, releasing a thick cloud of green gas that causes the patrons to cough in confusion as they wonder what the smell is and where the doctor went. Covering her face with a cloth, Irene walks through the tavern as the unconscious patrons collapse onto the floor one by one, thinking to herself that her escape has begun. Throwing her highly valuable ornamental dagger onto the floor next to the sleeping bouncer, Irene calls out, "Keep the change," as she makes a run for the exit, leaving the remaining guests in shock. Sitting completely unaffected in his chair, the masked chief recognizes the scent of the gas, realizing it is the signature sleeping poison created by the legendary Dr. Sean. Staring ahead with a dark, intrigued smile behind his mask, the chief quietly notes that the mysterious young doctor is quite interesting. Reaching down, the chief picks up the beautiful ornamental dagger Irene left behind, repeating her words about a short life and insomnia. Examining the glowing blade of the dagger, the chief realizes with a serious expression that everything she diagnosed about his condition was actually true. Staring at the dagger, the chief wonders if their meeting was a mere coincidence or if the doctor is scheming something, resolving that he must uncover the boy's true identity. Lying flat on her back in the grassy hills outside the village, Irene sighs in disappointment, lamenting that her plan was a massive failure and that she really messed up her chance to make a good impression. Frustrated, Chibi Irene clutches her head and rants that it is all because of those shirtless perverts who ruined her focus and threw her judgment completely off. Sitting up with renewed resolve, Irene tells herself that her next chance to meet the Regent King will be at the hunting grounds, planning to first obtain the rare thistle herb to secure another approach. Suddenly hearing footsteps under the full moon, Irene gasps in terror as she looks up and spots the masked chief standing before her with a giant eagle perched on his shoulder, wondering how he could have possibly followed her. As the eagle takes flight, Irene stares in shock at the towering chief, panicking that he is completely fine even after inhaling her potent sleeping poison. Backing away in fear, Irene realizes why he is feared as a devil, nervously asking what he wants as she secretly reaches into her medical bag to grab a sharp scalpel. Behind his black mask, the chief's piercing purple eyes gleam with absolute focus and intensity. Before she can strike, the chief lunges forward with incredible speed, firmly grabbing her wrist to block her hidden scalpel. Pinning her hands behind her back, the chief holds her close and demands to know what she was planning to do with the scalpel, leaving Irene trembling in panic. Bringing his face incredibly close to hers, the chief firmly demands, "Name." Held tightly against his chest, Irene looks up with a sweating, nervous smile, politely addressing him as Sir Wyatt and pleading with him to at least hear her explanation. Leaning in with a mocking smirk, the chief commands, "Take me to your master," sending a chill of pure shock through Irene. Staring up in absolute horror, Irene's mind reels as she wonders how he could possibly know about her connection to the legendary doctor, frantically asking herself why. Grabbing her shoulder, the chief pulls her forward, leaving Irene gasping in shock as she realizes she is completely trapped in his grasp. Under the full moon, the towering masked chief, Sir Wyatt, holds Irene close and casually claims, "I lent him gambling money. Quite a large amount, too." Glaring back at him suspiciously, Irene demands proof, saying, "Do you have any proof? I can't tell if that's true just from your words. It's true that the doctor loved gambling, but he wouldn't borrow money."
Looking thoughtful and suspicious, a chibi Irene wonders to herself, "I've never heard of that in my previous life either. Is he trying to deceive me?"
As Wyatt holds her wrist tightly, he insists, "I'm acquainted with the person. You'll understand if you take me there." Irene gasps in pain, muttering, "Ouch," before asking, "Then tell me the doctor's favorite food." Hidden behind a tree, the masked knight panics, thinking, "This is bad. His Excellency's never met him before. He's gonna blow his cover." Smiling confidently behind his dark mask, Sir Wyatt calmly answers, "Apple pie." Seeking to catch him in a lie, Irene immediately asks, "Favorite drink?" To which Wyatt effortlessly replies, "Tequila." Struck by metaphorical lightning, both the Chibi Irene and the hidden guard are left in absolute shock, screaming in their minds, "Wait, it's all correct? And how?" Gripping her hand tight in a fist, Irene remains determined to stay on her guard, thinking, "But I still can't trust him." Pointing her finger dramatically with boxers floating in the background, Irene smugly asks, "Then what's the doctor's favorite underwear color?" leaving the chief completely startled. Watching the ridiculous scene from behind his tree, the sweating knight panics, thinking, "What did you say? There's no way he'd know something that private." As Irene smugly expects him to yield, thinking, "Just admit defeat," Wyatt casually delivers the shocking answer, "Doesn't wear any." Sweating and turning pale purple with shock, Irene stands completely frozen as she wonders, "No way. How can he answer that? And how does he even know?" Admitting to herself, "I don't know myself either." Completely flabbergasted, Irene's mind reels with confusion as she thinks, "I had no idea the doctor had that kind of habit. What exactly is their relationship?" Leaning in incredibly close, Wyatt asks, "Do you believe me now? How about guiding me soon?" Blushing furiously at his proximity, a flustered Irene agrees, "Yeah, then please follow me," while nervously whispering, "Too close." Walking along, Irene tells him, "But first, I want to pick some herbs. Can we meet the doctor after that?" Wyatt calmly gestures and replies, "Yeah, I don't mind." Looking away guiltily, Irene reflects in silence, thinking, "Truth is, I don't actually know where the doctor is. I just wanted to find the Regent King's killer and stop my father from being imprisoned." Gazing up at the glowing full moon, Irene smiles with quiet resolve, telling herself, "But in a way, this is a chance." Walking beside her, Wyatt sweats slightly and looks away, thinking with immense relief, "Good thing I studied in advance." Wyatt recalls his spy notes detailing Sean's profile, including his birth date, unknown location, and likes, thinking, according to the information I gathered, Sean's recognized apprentice is... Wyatt silently observes Irene from behind as she happily hums and whistles, completely unaware of his scrutinizing gaze. Wyatt flashes back to a previous encounter, thinking, when I saw him at the hospital before, he was with 2 male assistants. In the memory, Dr. Sean holds up a syringe and says, Arion, hold this. Wyatt realizes Arion was one of them. Looks like my intel was wrong. Wyatt dismisses the discrepancy in his thoughts, concluding, Sean must have been spouting nonsense when he was drunk. Suddenly, a terrifying, high-pitched scream rings out through the dark woods, startling both Irene and Wyatt. The hidden guard, sweating on a tree branch, nervously wonders, are we really spending the night at that farm? It's the kind of place where you'd hear screams at night. Without losing a single second, Irene immediately dashes forward toward the sound of the scream, with Wyatt running closely behind her. They arrive at a rustic wooden house where a bearded villager warily opens the door, asking, who are you? As Irene begins to explain, sorry, but... The defensive villager gestures for them to leave, curtly saying, we don't have any room for you to stay. Please leave. Another agonizing scream echoes from inside. Ah, it hurts. Help! Hearing this, Irene pushes forward and declares, I'm a doctor. It sounds like there's a patient inside. I'll examine them right away. Falling to his knees in desperation, the weeping father begs, please, please save my daughter. We couldn't find a doctor and we're so worried. The father rushes into the room, shouting, Tanya, I brought a doctor, as the young girl reaches out from her bed in agony, crying, help me, it hurts. Entering the dark room, they look in horror at the bed where Tanya is writhing in pain, crying, it hurts, help! As Irene gasps, that's... An extreme close-up of Tanya's terrified, bloodshot eye reveals dark, squirming parasitic roundworms slithering across her eyeball as she screams, a roundworm! Standing over the girl, Irene urgently commands the father, please, give me some light. And the panicked man quickly replies, okay. Trembling with intense fear, the father holds up a single lit candle, stammering, here's a candle? Stepping in to help, Sir Wyatt calmly takes the candle from the father's shaking hand, saying, I'll hold it. Irene gently administers medicine to Tanya, reassuring her, I'm gonna make it better, so stay calm, drink this, it should help with the pain. I'm gonna remove the roundworm from your eye. Wyatt stares intently at Irene, deeply impressed by her diagnosis, thinking he instantly recognized a roundworm, something you'd usually only see on a battlefield. Seems like he's well-versed in military medicine, too. A tense close-up shows Irene's steady hands using thin tweezers to extract the slithering parasite from the crying girl's eye, as the father cries, stop. The girl screams out in pain, Kya! As Irene maintains her absolute focus, carefully pulling out the roundworms while Wyatt holds her head and provides steady candlelight. The panicked father cries out, don't, she's in pain, but Irene firmly shuts him down, responding, don't interfere, I'm trying to save your daughter. Pointing to several squirming centipede-like roundworms writhing in a glass tray, Irene announces, I've removed all the roundworms. She should be fine in a few days. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Irene looks on as Tanya lies peacefully with a clean white bandage over her eyes, weakly murmuring, Dad. A close-up of the father's eyes shows them filling with tears of overwhelming gratitude and relief. Crying tears of joy, the father rushes forward and wraps his arms around his daughter, shouting, Tina, while Irene and Wyatt watch with warm smiles. Holding his daughter close, the emotional father asks, are you all right? Smiling through his tears, the father happily promises his daughter, all right, I'll make you something delicious. Wiping her brow, Irene smiled softly to herself, thinking, it's all thanks to the medical kit Victor gave me. Without these tools and medicine, I wouldn't have been able to save her. Wyatt gazes at Irene with intense, purple-eyed focus, highly impressed by her performance, thinking, flawless treatment and incredible skill. He must be one of Sean's students. I think I've seen him before. Bowing deeply in gratitude, the father holds out a pouch filled with gold coins, saying, I'm sorry for how I acted earlier. Introducing himself as George, the grateful father offers a small part of his pension as payment, but Irene politely declines, smiling warmly as she tells him that treating patients is a doctor's duty and there is no need for formalities. When George insists that she at least accept the money as a token of his gratitude, Irene smiles and explains that she actually came to the area to gather medicinal herbs, but unfortunately has no place to stay. Clasping her hands together politely, Irene charmingly asks if he could lend her a room in exchange for her staying to help care for his daughter until she is fully recovered. Overjoyed by her generous offer, a deeply grateful George exclaims that it would mean the world to them, happily promising to make sure she is well fed during her stay. Observing the Chief Wyatt relaxing in a rocking chair in the background, Irene nervously notes that since he seems completely fine with the arrangement, everything should work out. Surrounded by beautiful blooming flowers, Irene flashes a bright, heartwarming smile of pure joy and relief. Looking back on her past, Irene reflects with a deep sense of gratitude that in her previous life, George was the one who had saved her from hunger and the freezing cold. Peeking into the room while happily munching on a delicious treat, Irene smiles and thinks to herself that George's homemade biscuits really are the absolute best. Meanwhile, Wyatt lies comfortably back on the bed with his shirt completely unbuttoned, showing off his muscular chest while casually complaining that the bed is a bit stiff. Staring blankly at the shockingly handsome display, Irene remains completely frozen on the outside, while a chibi version of herself screams in utter panic and confusion in her mind. Bursting into the room with a red face, Irene furiously demands to know why he is there, but a relaxed Wyatt simply counters by asking what she means and if she wasn't planning to stay there tonight. Blushing with embarrassment, a flustered Irene glares at him and heatedly replies that she never once said they would be sharing a single room. Standing with her arms crossed, Irene insists they should sleep in separate rooms, but Wyatt points out that there are only 2 rooms in the house, jokingly asking if she expects him to heartlessly kick the owner and his daughter out. Clutching her collar with a worried frown, Irene nervously panics in silence, wondering what would happen if they shared a room and he discovered her secret of actually being a girl. Teasing her with a playful smirk, Wyatt asks if she has some sort of secret she is hiding, listing off funny possibilities like snoring, grinding her teeth, or sleepwalking, which prompts a chibi Irene to scream that it's none of those things. Patting the bed beside him, Wyatt gently tells her that she must be exhausted from the long day and urges her to get some rest. Lying back amidst floating flower petals, Wyatt looks incredibly charming and relaxed with his shirt loosely open. Looking at him with a mixture of annoyance and disbelief, a red-faced Irene wonders if he is actually serious, angrily asking herself where on earth she is supposed to sleep now that he has completely taken over the bed. Huffing in frustration, Irene turns on her heel and stomps away to find an alternative. Determined not to share the bed, Irene grumpily grabs a large futon and tries to yank it away, declaring that there is absolutely no way she is going to sleep next to him. But before she can pull it away, a strong hand suddenly grabs her wrist tightly, startling Irene as she nervously thinks that he is truly a devil. With a swift, powerful tug, Wyatt pulls Irene right onto his chest, causing her to gasp in surprise as soft white feathers float around them in a sudden flurry. Holding her incredibly close, Wyatt stares down into Irene's eyes with an intense, captivating gaze as she looks up at him with a bright red blush. Trembling at their extreme proximity, a deeply embarrassed Irene desperately tells him to let go and not touch her. Behind his dark mask, a close-up of Wyatt's lips reveals a smug, knowing smirk playing on his face. Before she can escape, Wyatt firmly grabs her wrist and pins her close against his muscular chest, leaving her completely trapped in his hold. Blushing furiously from the intimate contact, Irene squeezes her eyes shut in sheer embarrassment. To her utter surprise, Wyatt gently guides her hand to show her that he was simply handing her a soft futon to sleep on, leaving Irene completely dazed. Looking down at her flustered expression, Wyatt smugly asks if she was just thinking about something weird, leaving a sweating Irene completely speechless. Ultimately wrapped tightly in her futon on the floor, a grumpy chibi Irene sulks that Wyatt is incredibly rude and annoying, though she reluctantly admits to herself that this situation is partly her own fault. Under the covers, Irene sighs with relief that she remembered to wrap her chest tightly, knowing he would have discovered her secret otherwise, though she still grumbles about how annoying he is. Gazing down at her from the bed, Wyatt silently wonders if Irene was too shy to take off her shirt to sleep, watching her with a curious and thoughtful expression. As Irene sleeps soundly on the floor, Wyatt reflects on how stubborn people like her tend to be. Standing guard outside the house on the cold night, the hidden guard sighs with immense relief, thinking he genuinely believed his master was going to try something inappropriate. Suddenly, a dark and bloody flashback reveals a sharp arrow flying through the air with terrifying speed. In the memory, a masked and armored Wyatt is riding his horse through a battlefield when a stray arrow suddenly pierces deep into his chest. Reliving the terrifying moment of falling from his horse under a lightning-filled sky, Wyatt suddenly jolts awake in bed, sweating and gasping heavily for air as he clutches his chest. Trying to calm his racing heart, Wyatt looks over to the bedside table and is surprised to find a small bottle and a handwritten note left for him. A close-up of the bedside table reveals a bottle labeled sleeping pills next to a sweet note that reads, "If you wake up in the middle of the night, take this." Softening his expression, Wyatt looks towards the sleeping Irene with a mixture of surprise and quiet appreciation. On the floor, Irene remains completely fast asleep, curled up warmly under her blankets. Looking down at his chest, Wyatt recalls the memory of when Irene, disguised as Arion, had lightly touched his chest, realizing the sudden pain felt exactly the same. Clutched by an overwhelming sensation, Wyatt reflects that the piercing pain felt like an arrow shooting straight into his heart, shaking him to his very core. The next morning, Irene stands in the steamy washroom wiping herself down, having removed her wet outer clothes to reveal the tight white bandages wrapped around her chest. Wiping her shoulders with a towel, Irene sighs with relief, thinking about how incredibly uncomfortable it was to wear the tight chest bandages all day. Grumpily recalling Wyatt's teasing behavior from the night before, Irene mutters to herself that this discomfort is entirely his fault. Carefully retying her bandages to ensure her disguise is flawless, Irene gazes at her reflection with a look of quiet determination, telling herself she must be extremely careful from now on. Stepping into the steam-filled room, Irene quickly puts on a fresh change of clothes. As a heavy downpour of rain beats against the window outside, Irene politely thanks George for the clothes, and George warmly replies that he is glad they fit so perfectly since they are clothes he wore when he was younger. Looking out at the rustic house surrounded by the heavy morning rain, Irene prepares to set off, announcing that she will be heading to the mountains now. Handing a small container of medicine to George under the rain-slicked porch, Irene says, "Please apply this medicine on Tina regularly." Looking surprised and highly concerned, George holds the jar and asks, "You're going to the mountains in this weather?" Irene explains her reasoning, saying, "Well, there are medicinal herbs that only grow there when it rains." Reassuring George, Irene says with a bright smile, "I may not look it, but I'm a professional. You don't have to worry." In a dimly lit, rain-swept shelter, a mysterious nobleman wearing a black mask crouches silently, eating simple food from a wooden tub while others nearby watch him in speechless amazement. Pulling up her dark blue hood as she prepares to face the storm, Irene thinks to herself, his adaptability is truly impressive. Waving back at George as she steps out into the pouring rain, Irene cheerfully calls out, "Take care," while Wyatt sits quietly in the background. Staring after her with a look of quiet disbelief beneath his dark mask, Wyatt wonders, is he really going to hike in this storm? Battling against the wind and heavy downpour, Irene begins her difficult trek up the steep and rocky mountain trail. Peering out from beneath her wet hood with intense focus, Irene notes, the trail's pretty steep. Slipping on a wet stone, Irene loses her balance, desperately trying to steady herself as she thinks, at this rate, gasping in panic as she slides down the steep slope, Irene struggles to find a handhold in the muddy terrain. Squeezing her eyes shut, Irene lets out a terrified scream, "Ah!" as she tumbles down. Suddenly, a strong hand reaches out through the storm and catches her wrist with a firm grip. Shaken and out of breath, Wyatt stares down at her with intense purple eyes, his dark hair soaked from the storm. Effortlessly pulling Irene back up to safety, Wyatt holds her close as she looks up at him in utter shock, stammering, what are you doing here?" Adjusting his hood with a weary sigh, a wet Wyatt counters, "In a situation like this, shouldn't the first thing you say be thank you?" Stepping closer to her as the rain beats down on his dark cloak, Wyatt tells her, "I thought you might run away, so I came after you." Turning away defensively under her wet hood, Irene stubbornly replies, "You don't need to worry about that." Sighing in quiet resignation, Wyatt mutters, "Either way, I'm safe thanks to you." Curious and skeptical about her risky trek, Wyatt asks, "What kind of herb is worth climbing a mountain in this rain?" Continuing up the rocky path with Wyatt close behind, Irene explains, "Thistle. It stops bleeding and is highly effective for major wounds." Looking around at the dark, storm-swept woods, Wyatt asks, "Wouldn't it be better to look for it after the rain?" Turning back to him with a look of absolute urgency, Irene insists, "I can't. Thistle only blooms during heavy rain." Covered by a dark hood glistening with raindrops, the masked young man stares out into the rain with a cold, determined gaze in his striking purple eyes. A close-up of Wyatt's purple eye behind his mask shows him narrowing his gaze as a sudden loud cracking noise echoes through the forest. High up on the muddy slope, a massive boulder cracks loose, sending debris flying as it begins to roll down. Turning around in terror, Irene realizes the danger and gasps, "It's coming his way." Looking up in absolute shock at the rumbling sound above them, Irene asks in panic, "What's that sound?" Sweating and trembling as she stares at the approaching landslide, Irene panics, thinking, "My body, I can't move. I have to dodge it." Reacting instantly, Wyatt rushes forward and grabs Irene, pulling her out of the way just as the massive rock crashes onto the ground. Slipping off the crumbling edge of the cliff as the ground gives way beneath them, Wyatt desperately holds onto a vine with one hand while keeping a tight grip on a terrified Irene. Dangling precariously over the deep abyss, Wyatt's boots slip against the sheer, rocky cliffside. Squeezing her eyes shut, Irene gasps for air, completely drenched as she clings to her medical bag in Wyatt's arm. Straining against the immense weight, a drop of blood runs down Wyatt's arm as his sleeve tears against the sharp rocks, prompting him to let out a painful sk. Finally pulling them both up to a safe ledge, Wyatt kneels in exhaustion, holding Irene firmly as he scolds her. "You said you were an expert, but you couldn't even read the trail." Looking at his arm in shock, a flustered Irene gasps, "You're hurt?" Clenching his fist over his bleeding wound to hide it from her, Wyatt brushes it off with a sharp grunt. Looking up at her with a weary, rain-soaked expression, Wyatt asks, "What now?" Showing no intention of backing down, Wyatt asks, "Do you still plan to look for that herb?" Looking down at her medical bag as rain drips from her hair, Irene thinks to herself, "If I remember correctly." Clasping her medical kit tightly against her chest, Irene reflects, "In my previous life, he was sent to battle around this time." A sudden flashback reveals a masked Wyatt in full armor on a bloody battlefield, looking shocked as a spear is thrust towards him. Determined to change his tragic fate, Irene resolves, I must hurry and find that herb. Feeling a rush of adrenaline and deep concern, Irene stares at Wyatt with quiet determination. With absolute resolve in her bright blue eyes, Irene replies, yes, I'm not going back without it. Looking down at her with a gentle, soft smile beneath his wet hood, Wyatt chuckles softly. Still stubborn, huh? With a swift motion, Wyatt swings his heavy black cloak over them both, shielding them from the heavy rain. Pulling Irene close beneath his protective cloak, Wyatt looks down at her and says, no, I get it. Your heart's in the right place. Just curb your pride. What does that herb look like? Blushing under his close gaze, Irene describes, it has purple petals that spread outward and thin roots. Wrapped warmly inside his cloak with their faces only inches apart, Irene's heart beats wildly as she wonders, why is he helping? Looking ahead into the stormy forest with a confident smirk, Wyatt asks, who are you trying so hard to save by going this far? I just wanted to save him at first, Irene thinks to herself, gazing out at the heavy rain beating down on the dark mountain trees. But now I'm the one dragging him into this. Clinging closely to each other, Wyatt and Irene run through the dark, rocky mountain terrain as a thunderous storm rages around them. Looking up from beneath the shelter of Wyatt's dark cloak, a drenched and shivering Irene feels a deep pang of guilt for letting him get soaked in the heavy downpour. Sensing her gaze, Wyatt slowly turns his masked face toward her in quiet questioning. Looking at his wet, masked expression, Irene wonders with concern, that look, is he blaming himself? Suddenly, Wyatt points ahead, his eyes narrowing through the rain as he spots something. Hey, look at that. Isn't that the herb you were looking for? Thistle, was it? He asks as Irene gasps in surprise. Rushing over to the base of a massive tree, Irene's face lights up with sheer joy as she spots the glowing purple flower. Yes, that's the one, she exclaims happily. Observing her bright expression, Wyatt silently notes, so that's the kind of voice you make when you're happy. Higher and brighter than usual? But still. Wyatt looks down at her curiously and asks, why aren't you picking it? Irene replies, if I pick it now, its medicinal effects will weaken. I need to wait until dawn when the flower fully blooms. Wyatt's purple eyes narrow slightly as he clarifies, so that means we have to stay here until then? Wyatt, please go ahead. I'll follow after I pick the herb, Irene insists, though she is shivering uncontrollably. Wyatt counters, you're trembling like that and still intend to spend the night on this mountain? Wyatt suddenly draws a sharp dagger from beneath his cloak, causing Irene's eyes to widen in sudden panic as she thinks, don't tell me. With a swift, fluid motion, Wyatt swings the dagger through the air near her head. You can't! If you pick it now, the effects will… Irene stops mid-sentence as she realizes Wyatt didn't cut the flower, but instead carved a large X onto the tree trunk. Wyatt explains, I've marked the spot, so let's wait out the rain in the cave. Leaning in close with a slight smirk under his mask, Wyatt whispers, it's not like the herb's gonna run away, is it, Doctor? Left speechless, Irene can only stare up at him in stunned silence. Inside the dry, warm cave, a crackling campfire lights up the space where Irene lies sleeping soundly under a dark blanket. Curled up cozily, Irene lets out a soft sigh, thinking about how incredibly warm and comfortable she feels. Yawning sleepily as she wakes up to the soft morning light filtering into the cave, Irene thinks, I'm glad I woke up before the sun rose. Suddenly, Irene jolts awake in realization, her eyes widening in absolute shock as she senses something unusual. I can feel someone's presence behind me. Irene panics as she turns around to find a bare-chested Wyatt sleeping right next to her. No way, why is he naked? Her face burning bright red, Irene frantically peeks under the blanket, thinking in terror, wait, am I naked too? Letting out a massive sigh of relief, Irene finds her clothes are completely intact. Phew, that was close. He almost found out I'm a woman. Staring at the sleeping Wyatt, Irene thinks, why is he so shy for a guy? Is it because he's still young? Good thing I didn't take off my underwear. At least my clothes are dry now, but just how long has he been like this? I better wake up naturally. Smiling softly as she looks at him, Irene thinks, but maybe just a little longer like this wouldn't hurt. He's asleep anyway, before she suddenly gasps in shock. Admiring his striking features, Irene reflects, no wonder the Anrolin girls were all over him. He really is handsome. Suddenly, Wyatt sits up beside her, prompting a flustered Irene to stammer in panic, you're awake? Shielding her eyes with her hands, a blushing Irene yells at him, hurry up and put on some clothes. Wyatt stands up calmly, holding his white shirt as he looks down at her. Have you forgotten that I'm suffering from insomnia? He asks, leaving Irene speechless. As he slips his shirt over his muscular shoulders, Wyatt asks with quiet concern, you seem to have a fever all night. How are you feeling? Blushing deeply with a shy and embarrassed expression, Irene looks down and softly murmurs that she is feeling okay now. Sheltered safely inside a rocky cave, Wyatt sits quietly by a warm, crackling campfire while a heavy rainstorm continues to pour outside the entrance. Looking out into the dark, rain-slicked night, Wyatt points out that the rain is beginning to clear up and tells Irene to get some more rest before sunrise while he keeps watch.
Okay, Irene replies softly. Looking at his weary expression, she worries, he looks tired. Is it because he's been helping me since yesterday? Feeling a sudden wave of exhaustion wash over her, Irene's eyes grow heavy as she thinks, so sleepy, I feel kind of bad.
Drifting back into a deep sleep, Irene's vision goes completely dark.
Suddenly, a terrifying nightmare begins, showing a sharp arrow flying through the air with deadly speed.
In the dream, Wyatt falls backward off his horse as the arrow pierces deep into his chest under a blood-red sky.
Weiss? Irene screams in her dream, reaching out in terror as she sees Weiss covered in blood from the arrow wound. Weiss was shot by an arrow. Is this a dream?
Looking down in shock, Irene realizes the terrifying truth as she remembers. The one who killed Weiss was the slaves? Weiss Simone?
Jolting awake with a terrified scream,
Irene sits up, gasping heavily, her heart pounding frantically as purple lightning flashes in her mind. Looking around the cave in a panic, Irene desperately wonders, where is he? She spots Wyatt slumped against the cave wall, seemingly asleep. Is he sleeping, she thinks? Was that Weiss's dream? Staring at him, a shocking realization hits Irene. Could it be the reason he has insomnia is because he foresaw his own death in his dreams? Stepping closer to him, Irene observes, come to think of it, this is the first time I've seen his real face. Looking at his flawless face, Irene admires his firm eyebrows, sharp chin, long feather-like eyelashes, and translucent skin. Feeling a deep sense of sadness, Irene thinks, the rumors were true. It's such a shame that someone like him would die so young. Irene looks down at him silently, her heart aching with sympathy for the tragic fate he carries. Gently draping his heavy black cloak over his shoulders, Irene wonders, maybe he's been having those dreams about dying every night, and now he can't sleep at all. But why did I see that dream too? Could my regression have something to do with Weiss somehow? Touching his forehead to check on him, Irene gasps in alarm. Oh no, he has a fever, he's so hot. Quickly grabbing his arm, Irene gasps in shock as she examines his injury. Ah! Examining the wound, Irene thinks in panic, this is bad, he's been poisoned. If this is from the injury when he saved me yesterday, then it's probably something from the Arushi family. But his symptoms are way too severe for that. The dose wasn't even that strong. Looking at the vials and syringe in her medical kit, Irene decides to focus, thinking, no, never mind that right now. With a firm resolve, Irene thinks first priority is detox, as she gently applies treatment to the poisoned wound on a weary Wyatt's arm. Wyatt lets out a painful groan, as his purple eyes slowly crack open. Looking at his severely bruised and inflamed arm, Irene thinks in panic, this is strange, why isn't it working? Weakly opening his eyes, Wyatt mutters, it's useless. Irene looks at him with deep worry and asks, did I wake you up? Wyatt explains to Irene, once a poison enters my body, I develop resistance to it, but the first time it hits me, my body reacts twice as strongly. It won't kill me, but no antidote will work either. I just have to endure it. Standing in the shadows of the forest, one of Wyatt's loyal guards looks on in deep concern, wondering, Master, why would you reveal that information? Looking at Wyatt with deep understanding, Irene thinks to herself, I see. So back in Enrollment, when I used poison, it didn't affect him because he'd already been exposed to that type in the past. In a cute chibi illustration, Irene ponders with curiosity. In other words, he used the debt as an excuse to travel with me just to ask my master about his condition? Looking at Irene with a soft, gentle smile, Wyatt asks, what's wrong? You don't believe me? Irene quickly looks down at her medical bag to put away her vials and replies, no, it's not that. Looking up at him with a determined and bright smile, Irene says, I just understand now that antidotes won't work. I'll go gather some herbs instead. Standing up with a calm expression as Wyatt looks up at her in surprise, Irene explains, the rain has stopped anyway. I'll go get some poison darts to deal with wild animals. Walking out of the cave as the morning sun begins to rise, Irene thinks to herself, and now the sun's up. It's a good time to pick thistles. There must be guards hidden somewhere, so it should be fine to leave him alone, right? My true goal is to save Father, but this herb is basically for that guy's sake anyway. As Irene walks off into the misty forest, Wyatt watches her from the cave entrance and thinks with a tired look, honestly. Suddenly overwhelmed by his condition, Wyatt bends over and coughs up blood into his hand as he struggles to breathe. Wiping the blood from his mouth with a weary smirk, Wyatt whispers to himself, seriously. Suddenly, two masked guards in dark cloaks rush into the cave, frantically calling out, Master!
Wyatt raises his hand to halt them and commands, "I'm fine, forget about me, go protect her." The two guards stand in silent hesitation, exchanging a worried glance beneath their dark hoods. Glowing pink thistleflower sparkles in the morning sunlight at the base of a massive tree root in the forest. Hurrying through the bright sun-drenched trees, Irene thinks with growing anticipation, "I'm almost there! Finally, the goal is in sight! Just a little more!" Suddenly stopping in her tracks, Irene gazes down at the muddy ground in shock and wonders, why are there so many footprints? Hearing footsteps nearby, a panicked Irene starts running, thinking to herself, is someone here? Peering through the thick bushes, Irene is shocked to see a group of noble-looking people gathered around the giant tree. A group of nobles flatter a high-status lady, exclaiming, "To think I would find such a rare herb here. It must be a blessing from the gods for both Her Highness and Lady Vivian," while Vivian smiles modestly and replies, "No, it's all thanks to Her Highness." A sudden, chilling memory of a sinister, red-eyed Vivian smiling down at her flashes through Irene's mind, making her break into a cold sweat as she hides in the bushes. Suddenly, a nobleman in a green coat spots her and yells out in alarm, "Who's there?" The guards quickly draw their weapons, shouting, "Protect the princess, identify yourself," as Irene hides behind a tree, thinking in frustration, "Damn it, I got caught." The guards threaten Irene with a loaded crossbow, but before they can shoot, a handsome silver-haired man steps forward and stops them, commanding, "Wait." Drawing his sword slightly, the silver-haired knight calmly tells his men, "Leave this to me, you all fall back," and the guards promptly reply, "Yes, sir." The silver-haired man steps forward with a gentle smile, saying, "We meet again, Cosmos. Forgive me for startling you." Seeing his face, Irene is instantly gripped by a surge of pure hatred and rage, the words, "You're the one who ruined my life," echoing fiercely in her mind. As he apologizes, a terrifying memory of a dark, blood-splattered figure of him looms in her mind, fueling her inner fury as she glares at him, thinking, "And trampled all over my trust, the bastard who ruined my life." Looking at her with concern, the silver-haired man asks, "Are you all right?" As Irene stares at him in sheer shock, thinking, "Wait a minute, that face!" Gripping a hidden needle in her hand, a vengeful Irene is consumed by dark thoughts, thinking, "I'll kill him. I'll get revenge for my mother, my father, and for the child we lost who never saw the light of day, and for myself." Recognizing her despite her disguise, the silver-haired man gasps in disbelief. "Irene, is that you? What are you doing here?" Irene panics, thinking he recognized me, while the silver-haired man is completely bewildered, wondering, what on earth is going on? She was in a coma after nearly drowning in the lake. She said she was going back to her family home to recover, but he assumes her behavior is a calculated ploy, thinking it was a lie, wasn't it? As if she expected me to come rushing to her side out of worry, while Irene secretly prepares her weapon behind her back, thinking, this is fine. I'm not the same Irene I used to be. Taking a deep, calming breath amidst a field of blue flowers, Irene tells herself, I need to learn how to control my emotions. Looking at her male attire, the silver-haired man blushes slightly and thinks, still, why is she dressed like this today? Not wearing a dress, it's a refreshing change. He gently takes her hand and asks with deep concern, are you all right? You must be surprised. Irene quickly pulls her hand away from his grasp and replies coldly, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern. The silver-haired man is left completely stunned and heartbroken by her cold rejection, wondering, did she just pretend she didn't recognize me? Vivian walks over and clings to his arm, asking curiously, could it be that you know her? As Irene silently observes her former rival. Glaring at her with hidden resentment, Irene thinks, Vivian, putting on that innocent act as always. How irritating. If only I had realized her true nature sooner. Pointing an angry finger, Princess Cynthia Montgomery yells at Irene, insolent girl! For a mere commoner to dare set foot in the Imperial hunting grounds? Irene quickly bows respectfully to defuse the situation and says, Your Highness, I am the one charged with managing the hunting grounds at the foot of the mountain. Pointing to the X marked on the tree, Irene concocts a cover story, explaining, there was a heavy rain last night, so I was in the middle of patrolling the mountain when I found some weeds over there and marked the tree. Putting on a pitiful expression, Irene continues her plea. Due to my extreme poverty, I sometimes take home these weeds that not even beasts will eat. Hearing this, Princess Cynthia's pride is deeply wounded as she thinks in fury, and here I, a princess, came all this way to pick medicinal herbs, only for her to call them weeds that even beasts won't eat? Looking incredibly offended and angry, Princess Cynthia glares at Irene and thinks, what an insult. As Vivian tries to interject, Princess Cynthia cuts her off sharply, snapping, that's quite enough. Turning her anger back to Irene, Princess Cynthia barks, can't you even tell the difference between medicinal herbs and weeds? There's a limit to ignorance, while Irene watches her with a subtle, mocking smirk. With an innocent, cheeky grin, Chibi Irene explains, but even these weeds have their uses. If it touches the skin, it causes a red, itchy swelling, but it's perfect for treating livestock. If you crush it and apply it to a heel, it stops bleeding quickly. If you would like some, before the enraged princess screams, "Silence!"
Princess Cynthia Montgomery looks incredibly insulted and yells in fury. I have no need for such weeds, so disappear at once. If I were to accept those herbs, it would be the same as treating father like livestock. Furious thoughts race through the princess's mind as she fumes. If word got out, I'd surely be condemned for it. Humbly bowing to keep up her disguise, Irene replies, "Oh, thank you very much. Well then, I'll just pull these weeds and be on my way." As the nobles and guards look on, Irene runs over to the base of the massive tree root to retrieve the pink thistle herb. Watching her closely, Lady Vivian looks on with a suspicious glare and thinks to herself, those precious medicinal herbs. Glaring at Irene's back, Vivian thinks in growing frustration, am I supposed to just let this stranger get away with taking what's mine? Putting on her usual sweet facade, Vivian smiles at the princess and praises her, saying, "As expected of you, princess, you have such a big heart." To distract the group, Vivian points off into the distance and suggests, "By the way, I heard there's a very rare bird over that way. Would you like to go and see it?" While the princess and Cosmos are distracted, Vivian covertly signals her hidden guards to eliminate Irene. Perched high on a thick tree branch, Wyatt's two cloaked guards watch Irene run through the forest after successfully outsmarting her pursuers. One of them comments in admiration, "To snatch those herbs from that arrogant princess? Impressive." While the other adds, "She's surprisingly clever," as two heavily armed soldiers in blue capes begin to tail her trail below. Looking down with keen eyes from beneath their hoods, the two scouts spot the armed soldiers closing in on Irene. One guard alerts his partner, saying, "She's being followed," to which the other replies with a dangerous look, "I'll teach them a lesson." Leaping swiftly and silently across the high tree branches, the two cloaked guards spring into action to protect her. Down below, the enemy soldiers draw their swords and charge down the forest path toward Irene as she runs ahead. The two guards suddenly leap forward, drawing their swords to strike down at Irene while she is bent over picking the herbs. Cosmos rushes in, shouting, "Don't move!" But before he can reach them, Irene swiftly shoots two poison needles directly into the necks of the attacking guards. The guards instantly choke and collapse to the muddy ground, blood spilling from their mouths as the lethal poison takes effect. Irene stands calmly holding her blowpipe, leaving Cosmos and the hidden guards in complete shock at her deadly speed and accuracy. Cosmos kneels to examine the pulse of the fallen guards, while Irene silently watches him from a distance. Drawing his sword and pointing it directly at Irene, Cosmos demands in disbelief, "What do you think you're doing, hurting people?" Looking down at her weapon, Irene thinks to herself, "Is this because of my past life? My body just moved on its own." Cosmos stares at her in shock, wondering, what is this? This doesn't seem like the Irene I know. Or is this a side of her I've never seen before? Irene calmly readies another weapon and warns him, "Those people were trying to kill me on Vivian's orders. I was just trying to stop them. So if you've got a problem..." Before the hidden guards can react, Irene launches a cloud of poison gas toward them, shouting, "You should just tell that to those weaklings." Looking back coldly as the hidden assailants collapse, Irene mutters, "Sorry, but it'd be a problem if anyone overheard this conversation." Cosmos snaps in frustration and anger, "Stop making excuses. You knew I was coming to help you, so why did you kill them?" Unmoved by his weapon, Irene tells him coldly, "Cosmos, you really haven't changed. You're only ever kind to other people." Glaring back at his sword, she continues, "Besides, I'm sure you don't care about our engagement anyway, right? The two of you have been lovers for ages, and I was a fool for not realizing it." Stunned and heartbroken by her words, Cosmos lowers his sword slightly, stammering, Disregarding his weapon entirely, Irene turns her back on him and begins walking away. Cosmos desperately lunges forward and grabs her by the wrist, pleading, "Wait, listen to me," as Irene gasps in pain. Caught in his grasp, Irene glares back at him with an expression of pure annoyance. Softening his grip, Cosmos blushes slightly and asks with deep concern, "Sorry, did I hurt you?" Seizing the moment, Irene suddenly slams her other hand down, driving a poison-tipped needle straight into Cosmos' open palm. Cosmos gasps in absolute shock as he stares at the needle embedded in his bleeding hand. Dropping his sword, Cosmos falls to his knees in agony and asks, "Do you let my guard down just for this?" Standing over him, Irene prepares to force-feed him a dark pill, thinking, "That's right, but if you hadn't come near me, I wouldn't have had to do this. Cosmos is a man of high status. He should be useful if I keep him alive." Irene forces the pill into his mouth and explains coldly, "What you just drank is cantarella. It's a poison that attacks the nerves and paralyzes the limbs. If you don't keep taking this antidote, eventually your entire body will be paralyzed until you finally stop breathing. So you'd better think carefully."
Looking down at him, Irene reminds him of his fragile position. A burden who can't even speak properly, let alone fight? Do you really think the Count's family will keep you as their heir? You know how ruthless the Count is, don't you? He'll pass your position to one of his illegitimate children without a second thought.
Pressuring him further, Irene leans in and asks, "Are you okay with that?" Cosmos looks down in despair, muttering, "Why would you do this? If only I'd realized when the necklace was stolen. It seems I overestimated you." Irene's eyes widen in sheer disbelief as she repeats, "The necklace? You mean the proof of our marriage?" Cosmos replies angrily, "That was a gift from my mother and you had your maid steal it?" Irene is struck by a sudden, terrifying realization. The necklace I treasured like a jewel in my past life was actually something taken by force? So in other words, Winter isn't on Cosmos' side at all, and Cosmos himself was nothing more than a pawn. Cosmos laments, "I regret ever saving you when you were drowning," prompting Irene to demand, "Well, in that case, let me ask you, why did you summon me on the day my father left for war?" Cosmos snaps back in confusion. "No, that's not right. You were the one who asked to meet. You sent a letter with the Russell family seal on it." Irene gasps in shock. "Huh?" Irene's mind reels as she connects the dots. The thing that framed my father in my past life was also a single letter. No way. The culprit was already using the Russell family seal back then? Cosmos looks down, his face flushed red with complicated, painful emotions as he stands before her. Cosmos looks up silently, recalling the past, the first time I met Irene. He fondly remembers seeing her as a young girl helping a commoner. She was helping a commoner. You probably didn't notice me then, but I still remember it vividly, your beautiful, shining smile. Facing Cosmos in the present, Irene thinks bitterly, "In the end, you never loved me for a single moment. I was nothing more than a tool to you." Her anger boils over as she remembers her tragic end. "That's why you used me without any remorse, taking control of the Russell army while my father was imprisoned. You tore my very soul to shreds while you watched our child die." With cold determination, Irene declares, "Let's call this engagement off," leaving Cosmos utterly devastated as he gasps, "Huh?" Irene recalls the tragedy of her past life. "In my past life, after my father was imprisoned, I began searching for clues on the battlefield with Cosmos' help." She remembers the critical moment of her investigation. "Just as I was about to identify the culprit, I found out I was pregnant. Back then, I was blinded by love, and Cosmos was the only light of hope in my miserable life. Believing that happiness would last forever, I delayed my investigation. But Cosmos was far from a beacon of hope. He was a trap meant to drag me and my family into the depths of hell. In 6 months, you should request to annul our engagement on the grounds of me being in a coma. You've always wanted to be free, right?" What did you just say? She was so desperate to marry me? And now she's trying to act like it never happened? This is a week's worth of the antidote. If you do exactly as I say from now on, I'll send you more every week until you're completely cured. Don't tell anyone you met me today, and you take care of those soldiers. Understand? Yeah. Good. Huh? She's just leaving me here? I was always the one who'd turn their back first. Irene Russell, I swear one day I'll make you regret this. Come on, it's time for you two to wake up. You need to return to your master. Outside a dark mountain cave, a mysterious, dark-haired man wearing a black eye mask stands in deep, silent thought with his hand on his chin, while 2 of his subordinates bow their heads before him. The 2 guards are revealed as Vance Corwin, the captain of the Shadow Guard, and Sykes Corwin, a Shadow Guard, both looking sheepish and dealing with sudden nosebleeds brought on by a detox reaction. Sweating and trembling under their master's intense, silent glare, the 2 Chibi guards try to excuse themselves, stammering, "We don't know how this happened either, but a man like him should be able to protect himself. Master, you should be careful too. I've picked all the herbs we need. Let's head back now. Are you feeling any better? He's terrifying. Are you worried about me?" Huh? The masked man suddenly leans in and inspects Irene's shoulders, checking her build while she stares at him in utter disbelief. For someone so small, your upper body is surprisingly solid, but you can't exactly protect yourself like this, so you really need to start training. Shut up. I'm already 15 years old. The masked man touches his split, bleeding lip in complete shock after Irene's sudden headbutt. Watching fearfully from behind the trees, the hidden guards think, "That's why I said you should be careful. Not only is she stubborn, but she's got a lot of pride, too." Ah, let's go. Hey, my nose won't stop bleeding. Maybe I should try that herb? You're making quite an interesting face. Is she teasing me? Her smile isn't half bad. There's someone important to me on the battlefield. Are you planning to go to the battlefield? Well, Arion. Perfect timing. As expected, you came through. She knows Victor. Hardly anyone around here should know his real identity. Just as I thought.
So Irene was involved with this bastard. With a sharp cry, a massive eagle descends from the sky, its wings stirring up a heavy gust of wind and feathers.
Looks like our trip to see your master will have to be postponed. I have to head to the battlefield now too. Maybe we'll run into each other there next time. That's a royal order from the king, sent when someone is dispatched to the battlefield as a military inspector. If he follows that order, he'll never come back. We'll meet again soon, because I swear in this life I'll save you. It takes at least half a month to make a medicine with thistle. We've been waiting for you, Dr. Arian. I need to hurry. Fortunately, with Victor's help, I was able to start producing the medicine right away. He really is an excellent assistant. It's a pleasure to meet you. I've come to assist Dr. Arian by order of Lord Wyatt. My name is Benson. What? Me as her assistant is already more than enough. Are you trying to order me around? Who do you think you are? Don't get ahead of yourself. Go tell your commander that I'm more than enough of an assistant. He flew into a rage just from hearing Weiss's name. That coward is too scared to even show his face. What did you just say? Say it again. I don't know why he reacts so extremely, but even so, everyone, let's eat. I was glad Tina was there. Tina seems to think of me as her benefactor and brings me delicious food every day. Then, shall we have a toast to Dr. Arian? Such a wonderful idea. I changed the fate of that mother and child. Cheers, everybody. If that's the case, maybe I can change my own fate too. It's getting late. You should get some rest. Just a little more. It's done. I have to go to the front lines. Right now? Yes, right now. That medicine, who are you planning to use it on? To think she finished half a month's work in just 10 days? Is she in that much of a hurry? I'm sorry, but I can't tell you right now. I'm sorry to ask, but could you deliver this medicine to Cosmos once a week and make absolutely sure he never finds out it's from me? Leave that to me. A request from my employer is a piece of cake. Then I'll take you by horse. A creak echoes through the room as the heavy wooden door swings open, revealing a green-haired figure cloaked in shadows standing at the threshold. Looking out into the moonlit night, the cloaked companion informs Dr. Arian that the horses are ready and they can depart. Quickly catching up to Mr. Benson, Irene calls out to Dr. Arian, apologizing for her sudden departure and asking him to say goodbye to George and Tina on her behalf. Dr. Arian stands quietly on the balcony, watching in silence as the two figures ride away into the misty distance, the sound of galloping hooves fading away. Looking in the direction they went, Dr. Arian murmurs softly to himself, wondering what Irene is planning but wishing her well. Lightning strikes violently over the majestic Russell ducal estate during a torrential downpour, where the Duchess stands alone in the dimly lit hall, gently touching a grand portrait of Duke Bowen. A maid escorts a hooded priest from the Joy Convent who has brought medicine for the young ladies. The Duchess dismisses the maid and receives the medicine, thanking the priest as he assures her it will heal her granddaughter's wounds. With his face hidden beneath his hood, the priest asks quietly if the Duchess has informed Duke Russell that Irene is in a coma. Looking tense, the Duchess explains that she has sent a letter, but didn't go so far as to tell him she went with her mother to recuperate. Handing over a sealed letter, the priest instructs the Duchess to burn the reply as soon as it arrives, and orders her to deliver the letter to the spy. As Duchess Russell reads the contents of the letter, her eyes widen in sheer horror as she realizes that Bowen will be accused of plotting high treason. Noticing her hesitation, the hooded priest smiles sinisterly and asks if she is really getting cold feet after coming this far. Illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning, the masked priest asks mockingly if he really has to spell out Bowen's past deeds to remind her. Sweat drips down the Duchess's pale face as she swallows hard in fear, caught in a terrifying position with no escape. She looks back up at the majestic portrait of Bowen Russell, her heart heavy with conflict and despair as she faces the grim reality of her choices. A dark shadow falls over the Duchess's face as she hardens her heart, preparing to make a fateful decision. Stealing her resolve with a grim expression, Duchess Russell declares that she will do exactly as he commands. Kneeling before the priest as a massive, dark serpentine aura coils around the portrait, the Duchess submits completely, addressing him as her Dark Lord, to which he replies with a satisfied smirk, "Very well." Meanwhile, two riders in dark blue cloaks push through the torrential downpour and flashing lightning, splashing through puddles as their horses gallop at full speed. Benson points ahead toward a massive military camp nestled in the snowy mountains, calling out to Irene that they will be arriving at the Wisteria Northern Expeditionary Force garrison shortly. Her eyes shining with hope and relief, Irene thinks to herself that she is finally about to see her father. They approach the towering wooden gates of the military fortress, with guards watching from the battlements under a windy, snow-filled sky. Instantly on alert, a guard in full plate armor points his spear forward and barks, demanding to know who goes there. Mr. Benson remains entirely unfazed by the spear pointed at his face, staring back with a calm, commanding presence while Irene waits quietly with the horses.
The guard gasps in sudden realization as Benson reveals his identity, stammering in shock. The massive gates are pulled open by the soldiers as they respectfully guide the visitors inside, telling them, "Right this way, sir." Irene smiles knowingly at Benson, teasingly pointing out that it is a crest from the Regent King and telling him it's pointless to hide it from her. In the busy courtyard, a courier loudly calls out for anyone named Arian William to deliver a package, while an irritated soldier snaps back that there is no one by that name in their unit. Hearing the commotion, Irene wonders who could have sent a package for Arian, thinking to herself if it could possibly be from her mother. Irene runs up to the courier, waving her hand and apologizing as she claims the package, while the courier grumbles about having called for her several times. Receiving the parcel, Irene holds the letter and recognizes the handwriting immediately, confirming it is indeed from her mother. Upon reading the letter asking her to deliver everything to her father, Irene sighs, realizing it's all just stuff for him, and grumbles playfully that she is there too. Suddenly, a massive horse rears up right in front of her, its heavy hooves dangerously close as she gasps in absolute shock. Looking up, Irene is stunned to see the supreme commander of the Westerian Royal Army and overlord of the battlefield, her father, Bowen Russell, looking down at her from his horse. Overwhelmed with emotion, Irene stares up at her father, realizing that for the first time in 8 years, she finally gets to see him again. With tears of joy welling in her eyes, Irene smiles warmly, thinking to herself that everything is going to be okay now. Bowen Russell looks down at her with a slightly complicated, sweat-dropping expression, murmuring that he had a feeling about her identity and was right. As her father recites her alias as the military physician serving the Regent King, Chibi Irene panics internally, realizing her father saw right through her disguise immediately. Kneeling respectfully before her father, Irene formally introduces herself under her alias Arian William, stating she has been assigned to provide special assistance, while Benson looks on in absolute shock, wondering how this physician knows his master's true identity. Bowen's face darkens with pure fury as he wonders how on earth his daughter got involved with that battlefield demon of a Regent King and that she would dare bring up his name. Shutting his eyes in deep frustration, Bowen sternly tells her that this battlefield is not a playground, calling her by her alias, Arian. Jest, the strategist, and Isho, the general, walk up to Irene with warm smiles, teasingly asking when she grew so big and commenting on how handsome she has become, joking that the ladies won't leave her alone. Laughing heartily, General Ralph teases Bowen for being dishonest, pointing out that the moment he heard Arian's name, he immediately jumped on his horse and galloped off, leaving Bowen speechless. Irene looks at the generals with a soft smile, touched by the fact that everyone still remembers and cares for her from when she was just a child. Remembering her past life, Irene recalls how these loyal men risked their lives in battle, searching for evidence to prove her father's innocence for 8 long years, only to fail and lose many lives along the way. In the present, her father suddenly grabs her arm, commanding her to come with him. As Bowen firmly pulls his disguised daughter away, Mr. Benson lunges forward, desperately calling out for him to wait. Mr. Benson yells that the person is in the service of the Regent King and demands to know how Bowen intends to take responsibility for taking her away, to which Bowen fiercely snaps back that before any of that, she is his daughter. With an aura of absolute authority, Bowen declares that he is the one responsible for this army, and that even the Regent King himself cannot let anyone through without his permission. Surrounded by the giant, intimidating figures of the Westerian generals, Mr. Benson sweats in sheer panic, realizing his mission is a complete failure and crying internally as he wonders what he is going to tell his master. With a firm and unyielding grip, Bowen Russell drags Irene directly into his massive military tent, determined to have a private word with his daughter. Clutching his head in deep frustration, Bowen Russell looks down at his disguised daughter, asking in distress if she has any idea where she is. A leather bag drops heavily onto the floor, spilling its contents in a sudden clatter. Swept up in the emotion of seeing her father again, Irene wraps her arms tightly around him, promising herself that she will definitely protect him this time. Bowen looks down with a deeply softened and affectionate gaze as his daughter clings to him. Gently patting her head, Bowen smiles warmly and chuckles, telling her she's being dramatic since it has only been a few weeks. Clinging tightly to his shoulder with tears streaming down her face, Irene thinks to herself that while it has only been weeks for him, for her it has been 8 long years. Bowen gently holds Irene by her shoulders, his expression turning serious as he asks why she dressed as a man to come to such a dangerous place, warning her that he cannot let her run wild anymore. Looking down apologetically, Irene quietly tells her father that she will explain everything to him later. Pointing toward the chest on the floor, Irene urges her father to check the contents of the bag first, leaving him wondering what it could be. Bowen happily rubs his face against the package, imagining it is a loving gift from his beloved wife, while Chibi Irene stands nearby looking completely exasperated. Irene urgently hands over the unfolded paper, telling her father to read the letter first, to which he sheepishly agrees.
Bowen's expression darkens and his jaw tenses up in disbelief as his eyes scan the contents of the letter. Struck with absolute fury, Bowen crumbles the letter in his hand, roaring in anger and demanding to know what is going on. With a dark, angry aura swirling around him, Bowen realizes with horror that the person who pushed Irene into the lake, sent a spy maid, and tried to poison them was someone from their own family. Gently cupping Irene's face with his hands, Bowen looks at her with deep worry and asks if she is really all right now. Overwhelmed by her father's warmth and love, Irene bursts into tears and hugs him tightly once more, crying out for him. Bowen holds his crying daughter close, stroking her hair and softly promising to protect her from now on so she doesn't have to worry. Under the moonlit mountain sky, the scene shifts to the warmth of Bowen's military tent, where Irene sits with her father and asks if he has ever received any letters concerning her. Restful yet thoughtful, Bowen explains that he received letters from Helene, but they were just checking to see if she was doing all right. Irene grabs her father's hand and warns him urgently never to reply to any letters from now on, even if they claim she or her mother are in danger. Bowen looks shocked as Irene explains that all the letters she supposedly exchanged with Cosmos were fakes sent by an imposter, and that Cosmos never truly loved her. Irene looks intensely serious as she points out that if the culprit is capable of imitating her father's handwriting, the situation is extremely dangerous. Bowen slams his hand onto the table in absolute rage, calling Cosmos a good-for-nothing bastard for not loving his daughter, while Irene frantically tries to calm him down. Irene waves her hands nervously to pacify her father, assuring him that she didn't love Cosmos either and reminding him it was just an arranged marriage. Bowen looks at his daughter with a surprised blink, processing the fact that Irene has no feelings for Cosmos. Bowen recalls the past, imagining a sweet and innocent Irene blushing and smiling beautifully just from hearing Cosmos' name. Closing his eyes with a satisfied smirk, Bowen declares that he never liked the guy anyway and promises to find her a much better partner. Irene asks how her uncle Devitt has been, and Bowen crosses his arms, replying that Devitt has been resting due to poor health lately. Irene's eyes narrow into a cold, piercing glare as she suspects that her uncle is almost certainly faking his illness. Remembering her past life, Irene recalls that Devitt was undoubtedly the one who sent the forged letters, and resolves to gather solid evidence before exposing him. Irene places a hand over her chest, pleading with her father to keep her identity as Irene a secret, explaining that the fewer people who know her true identity, the better. Irene explains that she came disguised as the Regent King's military physician to expose those framing her father, and Bowen nods in understanding. Bowen looks deeply concerned, insisting that the battlefield is far too dangerous and that he cannot let her stay in such a place. Clasping her hands together, Irene begs her father with cute puppy dog eyes, making it extremely difficult for him to refuse. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echo outside the tent, causing Bowen and Irene to turn around in surprise. A tall, handsome man with dark hair and a regal blue cape stands surrounded by glowing blue flowers, projecting a powerful and commanding presence. Irene peeks out from behind her father's broad back with a knowing, playful smile. Smiling warmly, the Regent King looks at Irene and murmurs with relief that it seems she has arrived safely. Irene looks up at him with a quizzical, teasing expression, asking if he came all this way because he was worried about her. Placing a hand over his chest, the Regent King politely bows and apologizes to Bowen for his sudden, unannounced visit. Bowen stands with his arms crossed, staring down the Regent King with a cold, defensive glare, demanding to know what business brings His Highness to the remote frontier. Veins popping on his forehead, Bowen growls in a murderous rage, asking the Regent King what he thinks he's doing, staring at his daughter right in front of him. The Regent King calmly explains that Arion is the military physician he brought with him, to which Bowen retorts through gritted teeth that he is well aware of how fine of a doctor Arion is. Gesturing politely, the Regent King asks if he may have his physician back, since there is nothing suspicious about him, prompting Bowen to ask where he intends to take her. The Regent King innocently states that he is taking her back to his barracks, which triggers an absolute volcano of protective fatherly rage in Bowen. Clenching his fist, Bowen frantically tells himself to calm down, remembering that keeping Irene safe requires keeping her identity a strict secret. Bowen puts on a forced polite smile, arguing that someone of His Highness's status shouldn't stay in the same barracks as the physicians, and assures him there are plenty of empty rooms. The Regent King calmly rejects the offer, casually mentioning that this isn't the first time they have slept in the same room, which leaves Bowen utterly frozen in horror. As Irene sweats nervously, Bowen's mind completely shatters in shock, with imaginary bolts of lightning striking his head in disbelief. Outside the tent, soldiers gossip about the shocking rumors being true regarding the Regent King's preferences, while inside, a furious Bowen prepares to make himself perfectly clear. Slamming his fist down onto the table in an absolute fury, Bowen Russell bellows a resounding absolutely not, completely rejecting the proposal.
Outside the military tent, the soldiers peer in and gossip among themselves, whispering about how Bowen raised his voice so fiercely over a mere military physician, and noting that the two leaders clearly do not get along. Watching the tense exchange, Irene silently recalls how easily her father was framed in her past life due to rumors of his poor relationship with the Regent King, realizing someone must have intentionally spread those lies and resolving to ease the tension. Stepping forward to break the ice, Irene nervously implores both men to calm down, assuring them that she has no problem sleeping in the same quarters as the other military physicians. With a sincere look, Irene explains that she studied medicine simply to be of use to the wounded soldiers on the battlefield, which makes the Regent King look at her with a gentle, reminiscent gaze. A soft smile plays on the Regent King's lips as he looks down at her, quietly recalling that she had indeed said those exact words to him once before. Looking warmly at the disguised Irene, the Regent King gently relents, telling her to do as she wishes since she is so determined. Bowen stands in silence, keeping his crossed arms tight as he shoots a serious, protective look at his daughter, contemplating the situation. Turning to his subordinates, Bowen sternly orders them to carry the military physician Arion's luggage to the quarters and commands everyone else to immediately return to their posts. Watching Bowen walk away, the soldiers outside marvel in hushed tones at how easily the formidable commander settled the entire dispute with just a single commanding sentence. As Irene carries her wooden chest, she overhears the nearby soldiers whispering and snickering about how the commander and the Regent King truly do not get along. Glancing sharply at the whispering soldiers, Irene's eyes narrow as she recognizes the gold avian crest on their uniforms as the Devitt family crest, realizing they are deliberately spreading malicious rumors right in front of her father's tent. Near the northern border of Westeria, inside the Nosteria fortress, the elegant and scheming Vice Commander Devitt sits back on a luxurious green sofa, languidly petting his sleek greyhound. A messenger dressed in green uniform bows respectfully, informing Devitt that there was a heated argument between the Regent King and the commander just a moment ago. Sitting up with a cold, intrigued expression, Vice Commander Devitt demands that the messenger tell him every single detail of the confrontation. Listening intently as the soldier whispers the details into his ear, Devitt lets out a dark, satisfied smirk, realizing he can perfectly exploit this mysterious new military physician to drive a wedge between the Regent King and Bowen Russell. The scene transitions to the field barracks of the army, where soldiers stand guard under the cloudy blue sky. Inside a clean, comfortable private room, Benson and Sean politely invite Irene to rest, while Irene stands with her arms crossed, surprised that a private room was prepared for her. Irene's eyes wander over to a wooden rack holding a neat selection of men's clothing, which she realizes was personally prepared for her by the Regent King himself. Sweat dropping in sheer disbelief, Chibi Irene clutches a razor blade in her hand, staring in horror at a shaving kit and wondering if she is expected to pretend to shave every single day. Suddenly, the heavy fabric of the tent door is pushed aside as a tall figure steps gracefully into the private quarters. Sean and Benson bow respectfully, welcoming His Excellency as he enters, while Irene stands frozen in place, holding her razor and sweating nervously. Noticing her tense posture, the Regent King tilts his head and asks with genuine concern if she dislikes the quarters and items he prepared for her. Quickly waving her hands, Irene nervously reassures him that she is incredibly grateful for everything he prepared. Closing his eyes calmly, the Regent King accepts her thanks before fixing her with an inquisitive look, asking when exactly she managed to realize his true identity. Irene explains that her first clue was during their very first meeting, when she saw him standing right beside Prince Ivan, knowing that anyone close to the royal family must be of high standing. She goes on to state that her second clue was when Wyatt knew intimate details about her master's habits that even she didn't know, which could only be gathered by the Regent King's elite intelligence agency. Looking at him with a clever smile, Irene explains that the final piece fell into place when he effortlessly sent his people onto the heavily guarded battlefield. Tilting her head playfully, Irene smiles and points out that only the mighty Regent King would possess such absolute authority and power. Smiling softly amidst a flurry of pink flowers, the Regent King gently places a hand over his chest, assuring her that he never had any intention of deliberately hiding his identity from her. Looking up at him with a mischievous glint in her eyes, Irene decides to tease him, asking why he lied about her master being indebted to him and why he always goes out of his way to help her. The Regent King gazes down at her in a long, contemplative silence, his purple eyes fixed intently on her face. Leaning in close until he is right in front of her, the Regent King looks at her with an intense and serious expression, asking what she would do if he said he simply wanted to keep her by his side. As he asks if she would believe him, Irene blushes deeply, her mind flashing back to her past life where she saw the Regent King dying on the battlefield, wondering if he saw the same tragic dream as her. Clutching the fabric of her shirt over her heart, Irene gathers her courage and answers with absolute certainty that yes, she would believe him.
The Regent King's eyes widen in sheer astonishment, completely taken aback by her unwavering trust and immediate belief. Looking up at him with fierce determination, Irene thinks to herself that in this lifetime she will absolutely protect him, her father, and her family from their tragic fates. Gently closing his eyes, the Regent King lets out a soft, incredibly relieved sigh, a beautiful smile gracing his handsome face. Cupping her jaw with his hand, the Regent King leans down close to Irene, murmuring in a low, gentle voice that he is deeply grateful to her for believing in such an unbelievable story. The next day, the Regent King walks through the dusty campgrounds of the barracks, flanked by his loyal commanders and a disguised Irene. Turning to his green-haired commander, the Regent King instructs Benson to guide Arion safely to the medical barracks, to which Benson respectfully agrees. The Regent King lingers for a moment, watching with a subtle, fond smile as Irene walks away into the bustling camp. Reaching into his vest, the Regent King calmly pulls out a folded piece of parchment. With a mischievous smirk, Chibi Regent King tears the paper to shreds, sending the scraps flying into the wind, while a Chibi-shan cries out in absolute horror as his precious IOU is destroyed. Walking through the busy military camp, Benson politely guides Irene as soldiers and horses pass them by. Suddenly, a soldier from Devitt's faction blocks their path and loudly demands to know if the newly assigned military physician, Arion, is present, claiming the deputy commander wishes to be examined. The arrogant soldier barks at her to hurry up, prompting Irene to narrow her eyes in recognition, realizing he is the same man who was causing trouble earlier and is undoubtedly one of Devitt's lackeys. Before Irene can answer, the Regent King suddenly steps in front of her, his imposing figure casting a shadow as he demands to know who gave the soldier permission to take his personal physician. Recognizing the terrifying presence of the Regent King, the soldier turns pale with sweat, stammering in pure panic as he drops to his knees to beg for mercy. Looking down at the trembling man with absolute coldness, the Regent King calmly orders Sean to punish the insolent soldier with flogging, leaving the culprit frozen in utter terror. As a soldier of Devitt's faction is dragged away crying out in pure panic that he was only delivering an order, he is tied to a post and mercilessly whipped. Watching the harsh punishment, the injured soldiers in the medical camp whisper in satisfaction, noting that the arrogant messenger is only good at talking and never steps onto the actual battlefield. Under the bright sun, a disguised Irene stands alongside the Regent King as they quietly observe the public flogging of the insolent soldier. Feeling a deep sense of relief at how things turned out, Irene smiles softly as nearby soldiers whisper about how the handsome new military physician managed to stir up trouble between the Regent King and the vice commander. Turning to the guards, Irene speaks up, stating that they will need another guide to lead them to their next medical assignment. The Regent King gazes down at Irene, silently questioning if she truly intends to head straight into Vice Commander Devitt's residence, to which she responds with a firm nod. Raising her voice to the nearby group, Irene asks if anyone among them knows the exact path to the Vice Commander's residence. Suddenly, a young boy named Johan eagerly waves his hand from behind Benson, loudly volunteering that he knows the way. Clasped in pure admiration, Johan gazes at Irene with sparkling eyes, asking if she is indeed Arion, the legendary personal physician of the Regent King. Feeling a warm wave of nostalgia as she looks at the boy, Irene gives him a gentle, reassuring smile and kindly requests his guidance. Before leaving, Irene addresses the entire gathering of soldiers, delivering a powerful warning from the Regent King that everyone must strictly follow Commander Bowen's orders on the battlefield and that anyone acting arbitrarily to tarnish his reputation will face consequences. Pointing firmly at the bleeding soldier, Irene warns the crowd with absolute coldness that anyone who dares to spread malicious rumors or act arrogantly will suffer a gruesome fate just like that man. While the Regent King smirks in deep satisfaction, his commanders Benson and Sean sweat in sheer disbelief, silently asking their lord if he actually gave such terrifying instructions. Arriving at the Nestaria fortress, the butler of the luxurious Devitt residence stands in the middle of a stunning lush garden greenhouse and warmly welcomes the guests. Bowing politely, the elegant gray-haired butler introduces himself with a sophisticated smile as the main caretaker of the grand residence. The butler politely greets the young physician, expressing his anticipation of working with someone of such rumored skill, as Irene bows in return and promises to do her very best. As they walk through the grand greenhouse, Irene's sharp eyes suddenly catch a glimpse of a mysterious figure dressed in religious garments. Spotting the distinctive cross and a peculiar crest ring on the figure's hand, Irene immediately recognizes her as a sister of the infamous Joy Convent. Realizing that the Joy Convent has been secretly managing Devitt's health and recalling her grandmother's suspicious ties to them, Irene requests the butler to lead her directly to the vice commander, handing him her medicine box.
As she follows the butler deeper into the mansion, Irene's expression turns serious as she tells herself to stay vigilant and quickly prepare a solid backup plan just in case. Walking a few paces behind, Benson whispers to young Johann, grumbling about how such an incredibly luxurious palace was built in a frontline fortress, while the military's budget is so tight they lack basic medicine. Stopping at the entrance, the butler politely informs Benson and Johann that they must wait outside, guiding only the physician through the doors. Inside a lavishly decorated room, Vice Commander Devitt rests languidly in a silk robe, greeting Irene as she enters. Seeing him, Irene hides her boiling rage, recognizing him as her father's treacherous friend who directly caused his tragic death. Keeping her absolute composure to ensure her sweet revenge, Irene bows politely and formally greets the scheming Vice Commander. Reclining lazily on a wooden seat with his loose shirt draped open, the long-haired man casually beckons with a finger, asking, "Are you the doctor, Ariane? Come closer." As the butler approaches carrying a tray, he politely offers, "I had some tea prepared, so please have some while we talk." However, as the aroma wafts through the air, Irene freezes, immediately recognizing something suspicious about it as she thinks to herself, "This scent." Keeping her composure and offering a pleasant, polite smile, Irene gently raises her hand to decline the offer for now, saying, "Thank you, but I will perform the examination first, and then I shall savor it slowly." Irene leans in closely to perform a medical examination, placing her stethoscope onto Devitt's chest while he watches her with a calculating, sharp gaze. Coughing weakly, Devitt explains that he caught a terrible cold a few days ago and asks if a legendary physician like her can identify the hidden cause of his persistent illness. Looking at his delicate features, Devitt finds himself mesmerized by the young physician's remarkably beautiful face, realizing why the Regent King and Bowen Russell supposedly fought so fiercely over him. As Irene asks if he has been experiencing chills, weakness, or a racing heart, Devitt replies affirmatively, smirking inwardly at how easily the young doctor seems to be falling for his fake symptoms. Stepping back, Irene breaks the silence with a bright, cheerful smile and casually informs him that he is actually in perfect health. With a polite tone, Irene explains that his minor symptoms are simply lingering fatigue from the war coupled with mental stress, assuring him that a few weeks of quiet rest will completely cure him. Taken aback but forced to play along, Devitt lets out a fake cough and politely agrees to follow her expert medical advice. Amused by Irene's sharp wit and directness, Chibi Devitt laughs to himself, thinking what a fascinating person she is and wishing he could recruit her as his personal subordinate. Wanting to initiate his dark plot, Devitt commands the butler to bring out a fresh teacup for their esteemed guest. Holding a chess piece designed to look like Chibi Irene over a dark chessboard, Devitt smirks maliciously, determined to keep her firmly trapped under his absolute control. The butler steps forward, pouring a fresh cup of tea while remarking that the previous batch had unfortunately gone cold. Offering the steaming cup to Irene, the butler politely asks if she would like some sugar with her tea, to which she calmly declines. Under the watchful eyes of the host, Irene lifts the cup and takes a slow, delicate sip, praising the tea's wonderful and fragrant aroma. Watching her drink the poisoned beverage, Devitt lets out a cold, triumphant smirk, believing his trap has been successfully sprung. Outside the glass window, a panicked Benson frantically bangs his fist, desperately wishing Irene wasn't being so incredibly careless as to drink a mysterious beverage in an enemy's home. Gently shaking Irene's hand, Devitt thanks her for her service and offers her to rest in his luxurious mansion, while Irene politely bows and states she only did her duty. The scene transitions with an ominous text box explaining that the tea actually contained a highly lethal chronic toxin that is extremely difficult to detect. Walking away with a triumphant glare, Irene reveals in her thoughts that she easily detected the poison from the Joy Convent, mockingly noting that Devitt is nothing more than a foolish pawn on her own chessboard. Title screen showing Chapter 20 of the manhwa, Don't Stop the Revenge-Mad Eileen. The butler leads Irene to a beautiful indoor bathing pool where several of Devitt's beautiful female companions are relaxing. Among the women, a beautiful peach-haired lady holding a golden cup looks back elegantly, introduced as Devitt's adopted daughter, Lady Idella. The butler watches Irene with a creepy, dark smile, eagerly waiting for the strong aphrodisiac in her tea to kick in, so she would lose control and attack the beautiful young lady. Suddenly, heavy footsteps echo through the hall as guards loudly announce that they must rush inside to protect Lady Idella immediately, leaving Benson thoroughly confused. Instead of Irene, it is the butler himself who has succumbed to the powerful drug, wildly pinning Lady Idella to the ground as she screams for help, while a completely unfazed Irene stands to the side casually eating fresh grapes. Benson and Johann barge into the room to find a chaotic scene of the butler being restrained by guards, while Irene calmly pops another grape into her mouth. In a hilarious chibi ending, Benson quickly covers Johann's eyes from the inappropriate sight, while Irene happily eats her plate of grapes and asks the bewildered boy if he wants some.
The crazed butler, completely overcome by the powerful aphrodisiac, pinned Lady Idella to the ground and yelled at her to stop acting so noble, accusing her of resisting him. Lady Idella desperately screamed back, crying out for him to let her go. In a desperate bid to defend herself, Lady Idella fiercely bit the butler's hand and struck him hard across the face, sending him reeling back as she gasped for breath. Watching from the shadows, the guards whispered to their captain in sheer confusion, wondering why the butler had succumbed to the drug instead of the physician. While they hesitated over whether to intervene, the captain grimly asked if this was really the time to be worrying about such details. Charging into the room, a guard forcefully kicked the butler away, sending him splashing into the water, while the others rushed to wrap a blanket around Lady Idella. Soaking wet, the furious butler screamed at the guards, demanding to know how they dared to touch him and if they had gone completely mad. Standing nearby with a completely empty plate, an unfazed Irene calmly ordered the others to pull the butler out of the water, noting that he was still useful to their plans. As the guards gathered around to comfort the shaken Lady Idella and Sean dragged the dripping butler from the indoor pool, Irene stood quietly by the dessert cart, observing the chaotic aftermath with cool composure. Vice Commander Devitt warmly welcomed his soldiers into the luxurious hot spring, boasting that he had specially requested the prince to build it for them. Urging them to rest well after their exhausting battles, the guests looked around in absolute awe of the magnificent facility. Surprised by the sudden arrival of so many people at this exact moment, including Devitt himself, Irene smiled beautifully, resolving to play along with the scheme since her grand play of revenge was only just beginning.